This first panel is about, the title is Sick, Tired, and Still Creating, Crip Wisdom, Neurodivergence, and the Politics of Expression. So just to get us grounded, I'm going to read the panel description very quickly. What does it mean to create while navigating bodies and minds that the world often deems unfit, unproductive, or too much? This panel centers the lived realities of disabled artists, writers, thinkers, and cultural workers whose creativity persists not in spite of, but through their neurodivergence, chronic illness, and atypical ways of moving through the world in crip time, a concept that honors slower, flexible, and more caring ways of moving through the world. From access-fatigued and internalized ableism to the radical joy of creating on crip time, today we're going to be exploring the tension between visibility, wellness, and the cultural pressure to overcome rather than to be. Now, the last question here that we're going to be exploring is, how do disabled creatives reclaim space, language, and narrative when our very presence is a disruption? And so I just want to take a quick hand poll. How many of you consider yourself a creative? Oh, more hands than I expected. Because I would argue that everyone here is creative, right? We don't want to think of there's people and then there's artists. We're all creative, we're all artists, and we all have basic needs. And a lot of these basic needs, especially when it comes to disability, is respecting things like crip time. How many of you have heard of that? Yeah? Less hands. I'm going to define it very, very quickly. So this is something kind of like the spoon theory, which we'll also talk about later. That's used by disability theorists and advocates to describe disabled individuals' unique relationship to time. So crip time indicates the complexity of an experience, the disabled experience in a world that has a lot of barriers to accessibility. So talking about how folks might need extra time to travel, extra accommodation for the train, right? Difference in seats, difference in any kind of support. So I want you guys to think about that, right? Okay, so now, our lovely panel. I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves very, very briefly. And I would love for you to answer this first question. How are you continuing to be creative, to express yourselves, and to support creative individuals while also honoring your own crip time, your own needs, and your own accessibility? I would love to go this way. So if we could start with you, Sarah. Oh, yeah.
We have like another mic. Lee, that mic is not working.
Is this one working?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Okay, so it's working? Okay. Hello, my name is Sarah, and I'm from Pepperell. I work in public health and with Partners for Youth with Disabilities. For me, my work takes a lot of energy. If I do too many things, I will crash, go into a huge flare, and not be able to do anything for days. Living with a chronic illness and continuing to create and do my work means prioritizing time to rest, relax, and do nothing. We as humans are our best when we prioritize our well-being and health. I am good at my work because I don't spread myself too thin.
Thank you. I echo a lot of what you said. You guys already know me. You'll get enough of me. But the way that I honor myself as a creative and in crib time, a lot of what you said, and giving myself grace when I don't meet my own expectations. I don't allow external expectations to be imposed upon me, and I think that comes from years and years of having to advocate for myself as someone who's disabled, and not have a visible disability and challenge biases through just being present. But I also take a lot of naps. Everyone says like, oh my God, Joanne, you're doing so much. And I'm like, I have a nap chair in my cubicle at work. And if I want to take a nap, I will take a nap so that I can recharge and then go back at my work fully present with a clear mind, but also relaxed and not stretching myself too thin.
Hi everyone, my name is Julie Lozano. I don't know why I looked at my speaking notes to introduce myself. I work with Joanne at Prospera. I'm a Pisces. And I come to this work as an advocate, an artist, a creator, and a friend that is rooted in the disabled community and in health equity. These days, my creativity is channeled into a couple of different ways, and a lot of it is on independent research, because I am an environmental scientist by academic standards, and systemic change. So that's exactly why I work with Prospera. A lot of what I do is slower, nonlinear, and grounded in care, because at the end of the day, I got that BCE, that big crypt energy. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Hello, my name is Lise Patterson, pronounced she, her. I'm the founder, executive, and artistic director of Abilities Dance, which is a disabled dance company based here in the Boston area using dance in art overall to promote disability justice. Created it when I couldn't find a space for myself as a disabled dancer, as well as not being able to find the intersectional stories that were existing within my community. And through that, it has grown beyond me to include a professional performing company of adult artists getting paid for that work, dancers, musicians, composers, etc., that create work on an intersectional lens, and our community engagement work, where there's conversations like this with you all, as well as recurring dance education classes in a variety of elder sites, schools, etc., with the curriculum I created to really promote physical, social, emotional wellness outside of rigid technique. And as far as space for myself, ongoing. It's a real conversation that we have in my organization, because while working within the systems we are, it was not created for disabled folks to be leaders. And as such, what can that mean in terms of being able to be my full self and not just parts of me within the role in creating space for others as well.
Y'all, this is an amazing panel. I'm like, and I'm also a Pisces. I knew we were going to be connected. Oh my God, really? February, yeah. Sorry, that's weird. Just kidding. Amazing. I think one theme that I'm hearing a lot is perseverance, especially in a really fast-paced world, in an incredibly capitalistic society that doesn't honor your own pacing and doing what you need to do for yourself. I think it's, we talk about arts as resistance, right? But also we talk about choosing yourself and choosing your energy, and choosing to protect your peace is also a part of that resistance, right? Incredible. My next question, I would love for this to be kind of a conversation, so feel free to just like, hey, I would love to answer this. Disabled community doesn't exist in a vacuum. Individuals have always had to build mutual aid, build community, and create nonprofits, much like Prospera Institute, to fill in the gaps where the government has failed, often for the cost of the persons who are doing this work's health, safety, energy, and ultimately creativity. How do we advocate for these necessary policy changes while continuing to create community and saving space to create and protect ourselves?
My advice is always be loud as hell and protect your neck. You will go far. Advocacy requires volume, persistence, and visibility, but it should never come at the cost of sacrificing self-care. The fight for policy change is as certain as the rising tide. Show up when you're ready to battle. Take a break when you need to, without apology. We'll keep the space warm for you when you're ready to return, because movements are built on community, and we rise strongest when we rise together.
Oh. Thank you, Jules. That was good.
Thank you, and I want to bounce off that too. From my experience, I would say the most important thing we can do is learn how to take time for our own needs. This is something I've learned through example by my coworkers and boss. It was a foreign concept for me until recently. I never separated my personal life from my work, which is probably why I burnt out. We have to prioritize ourselves, our relationships, our medical care, our self-care, and time to rest, so we are able to keep fighting.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think as someone who feels everything very intensely, I'm like a big empath and super compassionate. So sometimes also for me is like learning how to set boundaries when you're experiencing emotional overload, because sometimes it's not you with the big emotions. And actually, my beautiful friend Andrea taught me this concept of la cajita, the little box. So when there's a lot going on, just pull out la cajita and put it in there, and then come back and open it if you want to open it. If not, then whatever, just let it go. So I'm trying to embrace that, like not to pick up everything that everyone brings to me, because I don't know what energy I give, but everyone always wants to talk to me about everything. And I'm like, sure, I'm here to listen, but sometimes I'm also exhausted because I haven't taken enough naps and I'm dealing with a lot of bureaucracy. So I need to take care of myself and set some boundaries and say, okay, I love you, but not today.
I would say that, kind of echoing off of that too, it can be definitely difficult, especially as people who are within the community and who care about this work and want to continue it going. Access conflicts can occur where access needs might be in contradiction to one another, and having to have those difficult conversations and being as transparent as possible of what can be provided or not. Because there are so few spaces like ours, like this, that really center disabled identity, there's this higher expectation even to create everything, even with limited resources. And so the best one can do is just to be honest, to have the real conversations of what can be solvable, to have creative conversations of outside of the box access needs that could be met potentially, and to try to center everyone's humanity, including the leaders within that, because that often gets left behind or even stated sometimes. So, yeah.
Beautiful, centering humanity. I love that. A lot of good topics, a lot of good conversations. I'd love to pivot a little bit. We learned a little bit about the history from Mr. Masseau and Lauren about the American with Disabilities Act. It has yet to be ratified or amended since 2010. And at the time when the ratification happened, it was narrowed, or it was amended to narrow the definition, my apologies, of service animals to just service dogs, to just dogs. An unfortunate regression. And in the last 2 decades, we've seen monumental advancement in technology and science and the understanding of the lived experiences of those living with disabilities in our communities. It's yet to actually expand. We've had everything becoming less inclusive. How can we continue to work together to advocate for these types of policy changes that fit and support every person, regardless of whether they live with a disability or not? Who would like to go first?
And then pivot off. I actually have a service animal. Well, he's my emotional support dog, Bandit. He's in my bio. That's how you know it's real. And when I, was reading through the ADA, I was a little bit sad because there have been a lot of advancements since its ratification. And I think that having conversations like this to bring awareness and educate is part of it, because all movements are founded and started by educated people. And if you don't know that it has not been ratified and you're a part of a body that creates policy or does some type of advocacy, it's good for you to be here so that you can think about, wow, how do I amplify this? I do not want it to be revised under this current administration. I don't think it's the wisest thing to do. Please don't put me on air saying that. But I think it's very dangerous to put such a sensitive topic in the hands of such a polarizing administration, because it could cause more harm than good. And disabled communities are already suffering a lot. So it would only exacerbate how much we're suffering to just be.
So I would say policy change is done through collective action and enough people saying, this isn't okay and I am going to change it. This takes awareness, education, and collaboration. If anyone is looking to create change in disability laws, I would start by spreading awareness on these issues, sharing stories of those affected, and creating meaningful conversations with other groups and people in power.
A little bit to just piggyback off of what Joanne said, I believe real change begins with education. Embedding disability history into our standard curriculum highlights the resilience and collective power that led to the ADA in the first place. Disabled history is American history. And like this country, the ADA must evolve. When our history is taught and our voices are represented in leadership and advocacy for expanding, the ADA becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Greater this, not one of our Supreme Court justices identify as disabled. And so I want you to ask yourself and your representatives why that is.
At Ability Stance, we actually more directly do policy work within art because especially with dance as a tool for movement, we can actually use that for literal movements across different identities. An example is our intersection series where we highlight BIPOC and disabled honorees past and present, kind of translating their lives into music and movement, but also weaving in bill language of bills that are currently on the state floor that are impacting the deaf and disabled community, the queer trans community, and more, and partnering with advocacy groups like Disability Policy Consortium, Mass Trans Political Coalition, and more to build kind of cross-movement solidarity because we cannot think of these issues in alone. We can only think about it in totality so that we can consider everyone in our movement work. And it just requires having conversations with folks, getting to know the folks in the advocacy group, getting to know your representatives. And Representative Vitola is now a friend of mine who I can say, hey, pull up a sheet, here are the bills you need to advocate for, and let's talk about it and why. Because that kind of movement is what will drive movements, even if it takes years, which is the hard part. Even if we don't see it ourselves, the movement is still ongoing.
And just to piggyback off that, like you said, the perseverance and the fact that it does take years, right? And if we're talking about honoring ourselves, honoring crip time, giving ourselves and our colleagues grace, we're talking about a long battle, right? Not the war, the battle. Or is that backwards? Did I say that backwards? My bad. You know what I mean. Quickly pivoting as a piggyback onto this topic that we just had, you know, it's incredibly hard to sustain your own career as an artist, to sustain your own practice as a creative, and also to live in the world that we live in. You know, according to the World Health Organization, especially when Medicaid is being cut left and right, an estimated 1.3 billion people experience a significant disability. This represents about 16% of the world's population, or about 1 in 6 of us. Some persons with disabilities die up to 20 years earlier than those without. They have twice the risk of developing conditions, you know, very severe conditions such as depression, asthma, stroke, and face many, many health inequities, a lot of we've talked already about today, right? Especially when you consider the stigma of being disabled, the discrimination, poverty, and exclusion from education and employment that comes with it. Healthcare where we are makes it difficult to navigate the world, receive necessary and vital care unless you understand disability through lived experience, through familial, through personal, you know, yourself. And it's very challenging at this point, especially we talk about how none of the Supreme Court justices identify as having a disability. There's a communication and an education barrier, and there's a limit to power when only a few hold all of the answers, right? All the definitions. What's a piece of advice that you would like to give to somebody, regardless of their affiliation or understanding at this moment of the disability spectrum, to help them understand or to help them engage in a deeper understanding of these topics and how where to start, basically, how to even start getting engaged. Yeah.
I think in this moment of anti-intellectualism, the most radical thing you can do is educate yourself. And that comes from reading from different scholars of lived experience. That comes from watching documentaries or listening to podcasts, whatever is your preferred mode of engaging in educational text. To be able to continue to do that, as well as to continue to be able to support local disabled-led organizations, coming out to performances, involving yourself in advocacy groups and more, to be able to continue learning, to continue growing, to continue questioning yourself and your own biases, because it's an ongoing journey of this equity work, and to continue to better oneself within that is only going to make everything just a bit better.
That's great. That was so good. My piece of advice is always to engage with your community. If you see someone disabled, don't look away, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Just do it respectfully. I think it's important that we lean into the discomfort of learning, because that's where the real understanding begins. These inequities are lived realities, not abstract statistics. My advice is to commit to listening and showing up for fellow disabled voices, and supporting organizations that fight for access, and then also using your own platform to elevate those voices, no matter how big or small, to advocate for change. Remember that each voice carries equal weight, and an avalanche of equity begins with a snowflake of action.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Elise and Julie. I'm like over here taking like notes, like manic writing. I think also, in addition to like supporting disabled economies, which include nonprofits and small businesses, because there are a lot of business owners who are disabled, and BIPOC as well. Yeah. I would also say like hire disabled people and just be patient. I think that working with Julie I'm like anxious, or I'm on 1,000 all the time. And working with Julie and having her, it helps me slow down. Like she's like, hey Joe, like how are you feeling? Let's take a deep breath, and then we don't have to do this right now. We can take a nap and come back to it. We've been telling each other that for the past 3 days.
I told her, I was like, next year, let's schedule a 30-minute nap for everyone.
Yeah, it's like, I think that sounds like a good idea. But also like looking inside yourself, because like you said about asking questions and being respectful, sometimes we have to question our own, like why we're uncomfortable with something. You have to, it's easy to like project and say, ugh, that, I don't want to be near that person. But for me, it's deep spiritual work when you can sit with yourself and ask yourself those questions, like, why does this make me uncomfortable? And why am I othering somebody when I also am not perfect? So those things really is what I try to do every time I engage with someone, and I advise that somebody do that as well.
So I had a written response, but I actually want to go off something that you guys said, that it reminded me. So a lot of us didn't really grow up with disabilities or like people in our lives. So we had to like unlearn a lot of our own bias and ideas about what disability looks like. And honestly, we don't have a lot of good disability representation in society for positions of power. People are afraid, especially within mental health, to show any sign of weakness. I know I've felt like that before. And I think, honestly, a lot of this starts with our young people, with kids. I think it starts with books on disability. I think it starts on having friends that are disabled and not turning away and being afraid when their kid says something that like, oh, what's wrong with them, mommy? And it's almost like unlearning those ideas of, oh, I shouldn't say anything. And I also want to read my my response.
You put work into that.
If someone's looking to grasp a deeper understanding of disability and these related topics, I would say to listen and join nonprofits that are uplifting disabled voices. Join initiatives and bills that protect and support disabled people. But whatever you do, don't do nothing.
Because dismantling work is hard.
So this is the last question, sad but true. We talk a lot about difficult topics today. We've talked a lot about the challenges that you've had to overcome, the challenges that you live with every day. But I just want to say, this is a really incredible panel of accomplished people, accomplished, beautiful, talented, just brilliant human beings. Even in the pre-panel discussion, we couldn't stop talking. Because the passion and the love, even the love in your last responses, it's a real privilege because I feel like society has this expectation that folks with disabilities are often incapable or inspirational with this undue, unearned situation where people think that just by existing it's an inspiration. But you guys, everybody is a person first, right? So just thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for being here. And the last question, I want to end the way we started. The question for the panel was, how do disabled creatives reclaim space, language, and narrative when our very presence is a disruption? So how would you like to leave our audience today with that answer before we go into a quick Q&A? Would you like to go first? Or? I know it's a big question to ask, and then just throw the mic.
I think speak up. I'll share a brief anecdote. I recently went in to get my wisdom teeth extracted, and the doctor sent me for a cardiology workup. Long story short, I get to my appointment for the cardiology workup, and the PCP was not being nice, and it was like 8 in the morning, and I was not in a nice mood. So I said to her, 1, I do not want to speak to you. You are not seeing me. And 2, I want the number to patient services because you will no longer be my PCP. And I think that when people understand how much power they have in spaces, that starts to change the conversation, because I was able to say, I know my health, I know what's going on with me, and I know that this is not an emergency to you, but it's an emergency to me. So I need you to listen to me. And when we're able to tell people, demand that space, you're not asking for permission to be in the space, you have to demand it. And I think that once you start, reframing how you enter a space and you're claiming that space, that's when you can reclaim what disability means to you.
I think the biggest thing we can do as disabled people is to stand tall and not be afraid to take up space. The biggest thing I've learned through doing advocacy and public health work is that confidence, knowledge, and community support are your biggest driving factors to succeed and change false narratives about disabled people. When I was intimidated and standing alone, it was often easier for people to push me around. It was easier for people to make me feel small and insignificant. Once I reclaimed my power, stood tall, and didn't accept unacceptable behavior, the way people treated me and saw me shifted. Their belief that I was incapable and insignificant because of my disability turned into amazement, inner reflection, and rethinking their future perspective on disability.
I like that.
I think when I was typing out my answer, I was just thinking about what is the most real thing I could say, what it means to me. And essentially, I'm a writer as well, so I just went for it. And I just thought that disruption is just a fancy word for raw creativity. We turn exclusion into performance, silence into sound, absence into presence, and space into theater. That's a reclamation of power tinted with the beauty of rebellion. We are not the opening act. We're not the opening act. We're the headliner. And it may unsettle some people, but Lord knows I love the attention. That's the Pisces in me, guys. I can't. It's part of my DNA.
So I would say that as a multiply disabled, black, youngish looking woman, my very presence is a disruption in space, especially in a leadership role. And so claiming that, acknowledging that, using it, what privilege I have to be able to put others in the room with me as well, to be able to continue this work, continue this movement, and to recognize to the exhaustion that that carries with holding all these identities in this leadership space. And so to take time for myself to rest. For me, it's to read, to talk with loved ones, to regenerate in community myself, so that I can do more work for community, and to create art that continues to change narratives and continues to question and transition thoughts around our community from both a community perspective but also a legislative perspective, and how over time that has impacted with community bills to support the work that we do to protect our rights as much as possible, especially in a time such as this.
Thank you, everybody. This has been amazing. I think we have time for 1 or 2 audience questions, if anybody has anything super pressing for our panel. Yeah? We have the one microphone now, so I'm gonna...
Hi, my name is Harry Weissman. I run the Disability Policy Consortium, a disability rights and advocacy organization in Massachusetts. I am curious from the panelists, any or all who want to answer, given I feel like there's a lot of challenging stuff right now, what is some disability justice work that you are seeing that is making you feel hopeful or inspired or excited?
So for me, I am someone that protests a lot and is very involved in activism all over. And I think it was about a month ago, I was able to protest with a few thousand people in Boston, and we walked down the streets for disability rights. We had probably 100 people in wheelchairs. We had a whole bunch of people on rollators. We had nonprofits that serve disabled people, including Partners for Youth with Disabilities. We had so many people on all different spectrums of experiences with disabilities, and it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And I felt empowered and like we can do this.
Yeah, I agree, love. In addition to like personal disability, I like to look at things from a social lens a lot. I live in East Boston, and there's a big movement of protecting our community right now because ICE is regularly doing raids. Like the other day by my mom's house, they closed off the corner and raided a small community organization that does a lot of mutual aid. So I'm a part of activist movements locally, that we are not only thinking about individual disabilities, but how our communities are being disabled at this time, which is also why we're having this conversation. So that's the way that I participate. I'm also like a big rioter, but I do the best of my work on the back end, like I'm the person that organizes and then puts people in front to talk, and I'm just in the back, so that's the way that I disrupt.
I pressure dare I say, harass my local politicians. Zoran Mandami, I live in New York City, so we have a very influential, very hotly, it's a big deal. It's hard to say because he's really like, yes, he's got the Riz, he's the Rizzler. But yeah, actually it's weird because I reached out to his campaign. There are several different things that I'd like to advocate for myself because I can't get around New York, but also, I live in a vulnerable community. I myself use public benefits, and one of those things is like, you can't use your EBT cash to pay for a grocery delivery, but you can't leave your house to go get groceries because you can't lift them. And so it puts this additional strain, and you can't put it on a debit card, only on your benefits card. And it's just like, okay, how many more hoops do I have to run through? And if it's not just me, it's my neighbors, my friends, just people in the community. It's not their burden. It's not their burden. And the local politicians are the ones who can make those changes within their state, and that kind of change reverberates outward.
I would say the biggest thing right now is just connecting with community, both in folks that are doing similar and different work in a local space to see how we can kind of utilize our resources to mobilize, as well as just connecting with folks nationally to see what are they doing in their states, what are they seeing, what can we learn from each other, or just having a moment to vent on the phone and to kind of be there for one another through different challenges and different wins of that happen in this work that could only be shared through community in ways that you don't have to explain a lot of everything. You can just exist and be together. And just continuing those conversations, continuing those connections, because that's the biggest thing that we can have right now is just to feel connected with one another in community.
If you don't know me, I am from the Boston University School of Theology, where you might or might not know that on top of all the other things Jo does, she's also a student in our Masters of Divinity program. And I've had the great joy and pleasure of having her in my class, and then also now serving as her mentor in all things related to the research that she does. So really, really my privilege to be here. I am a sociologist by training, a sociologist of religion, and my specialty area has been in the study of congregations, congregational life, and their social and political activism. So I come to these topics as a scholar. I also come to these topics as having been raised by a father with a disability, a lifelong disability, for whom the church was incredibly important, but also wrestled a lot with some of the theological ideals about disability, about illness, that really caused him to some undue mental and spiritual suffering, I think, through the years. So he was always bringing in a mat to church. He was always at church, but he couldn't sit in the chairs for long periods of time. So he would bring in a mat and lay it out on the floor in the back of the congregation and lay down for the service. And we could tell a lot about a congregation based on how people responded to somebody lying down on the floor in the back. So that's a lot of my personal connection to the topic. I'm going to welcome our panelists. I will say that Reverend David Wright, unfortunately, was called out on some urgent denominational business, so he won't be able to join us, unfortunately. But we have Reverend Gloria White-Hammond. Please join us, Pastor Gloria. We have Jamie Givens from the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization. Jamie. I'm sorry? Oh, okay, so we have two. So we have two panelists. And we have Sister Dee Spinkston, who is also from Bethel AME. So give our panelists together a round of applause. So we really hope you all will step up into this space and have lots of great questions for our panelists so we can use our time well. Okay. So as with the last panel, I want to start us with a reading of the description for our time together, recognizing that historically the church has been a really important space for inclusion and for health equity, but also recognizing some of the challenges that it faces in its role. The description reads, as the Black church faces generational decline, a critical question emerges. What happens when one of our longest standing sources of care is no longer accessible to disabled congregants and their families? This panel explores the spiritual, ethical, and public health implications of the church's fading role in supporting disabled people, particularly in Black and brown communities. For generations, churches have offered informal infrastructure, spaces for pastoral care, health advocacy, and community belonging. Yet ableism, lack of access, and theological silence have often excluded those living with disability, and those two pieces together are certainly part of my experience. In bringing together faith leaders, disability advocates, and public health practitioners, this conversation reimagines what justice-rooted, accessible ministry looks like in a time of deep spiritual and structural transition. So I would love to invite the two of you to first introduce yourselves and the experiences that you bring to the topic. Pastor Gloria.
Thank you so much. Again, I'm Gloria White-Hammond, and my husband and I co-pastor this congregation. This conversation is also very personal for me. My family has a genetic a neurological problem. My grandmother, my father, 6 of my 7 siblings, and now 5 of the nieces and nephews have a progressive neurological illness that begins in the mid-30s. It's called spinocerebellar ataxia. And we appreciate it. I've learned about this. We saw my father, what it means is that the gait is what we call ataxic. So if you remember the old days when people used to get drunk, now they get high. But in the old days, we would see people getting drunk, and they'd have a staggering gait and slurred speech, et cetera. And so that's the condition that my family has. It affects the part of the brain called the spinocerebellum. And again, usually begins in the mid-30s. And so my father began with these symptoms. We had no idea what they were, and it wasn't until I was in my second year of medical school that he got a diagnosis, and we learned that it was genetic. And again, the nature of it is that any one of us has a 50% chance of getting the disease. Like I said, 6 of my 7 siblings have had the disease, so 6 of my 7 siblings have died. The other 2, myself and my youngest brother, remain. And again, we are now experiencing this in the context of our nieces and nephews. So for me, this is a very personal conversation. And obviously, in the context of pastoring this church, it's been a major part of how we have thought about ministry. And so that's what brings me here today.
Good morning. My name is Charlotte Spingston. Everyone calls me Dee. And I also come with very personal experience related to disability to this topic. I am several things. The daughter. My father he was himself disabled. He was a disabled veteran. In addition, he was quite dyslexic and actually not literate. He could not read. I am also the sibling of a young man with a disability. Actually, I could say 2. One who also had dyslexia, and another who today would probably be diagnosed as autistic. So as the daughter and sibling, and aunt of individuals with disabilities. That is sort of what I bring as a part of this conversation as well.
Thank you so much. So what are some of the basic limitations to church engagement and accessing community care that those with varied disabilities and their families experience from your standpoint? What are some of the particular patterns of limitations and gaps even that you've noticed?
Well, I'd say obviously there are theological challenges, and so much of what we have taught and preached have fed into people's perceptions of disability and being associated with some sin. It's something wrong. There are a number of stories and texts that we have had to unpack, and one that I can think of most obviously is the story of the child who was born blind. And the question was, well, who did something wrong here? Was it the parents? Was it the kid? Clearly somebody did something wrong if this child was born blind. We needed to unpack a number of those texts. And so in many ways, the church has traditionally, like the rest of society, enabled ableism. So that's been a very significant body of work for us. The other thing is also just physical limitations. We started our church 38 years ago in our dining room, and very early on we could see that there were some constraints just getting up those few little steps into the dining room. We then went to a nursing home, and then went to from there and had a wonderful ministry. Our earliest members were members in the nursing home, and then we went to a community center, and then to Parkside, to a school building, and then finally we came here. And I'd say out of all of the places that were had difficulties with accessibility, the place that we've been that had the biggest problem was here. And so when we moved here, this was an old Catholic parish. This was built in the 1910s. It was when the Forest Hills was like the new neighborhood in Boston, and so of course they needed to have a Catholic church here, and when we came, there again just lots of issues in terms of accessibility that we had to do. And so that big ramp that you see out there wasn't there when we bought the church, and that was a significant investment. We were grateful that we were actually found the quarry from which the original stone for the church came, so that's why it matches. We have had to put in elevators, and again, just you've seen some of the things that we were able to do in terms of just physically accommodating people. And I'd say the biggest challenge is really mentally accommodating people, and really thinking not so much in terms of it's okay to come here, but you are welcome here, and creating a space for belonging. So we've done a good bit of work around just educating people, and I can talk more about that later, but that has really been a big chunk of our work, and Dee can talk about really the critical way that she got us started thinking about this conversation.
I would say, as someone who is a lifelong professional in the field of disability, particularly working with families who have children with disabilities. I think one of the challenges I've noted and experienced over the years is many times in our community, I would say communities of color, disability is invisible. It doesn't, in some ways, hold the stigma that disability holds in other communities. The number of times I've had conversations, for example, with parents who have a child with a disability, they think, well, he's just like his Uncle Joe. It's like, well, yes. Did your Uncle Joe have autism? Well, no, I don't think so, but he's just like his daddy. It's just like his Uncle Joe. It's like, well, you know, his auntie had the same issue, but they don't necessarily go to diagnosis identity. in terms of disability. And this can present challenges in terms of seeking support, identifying support. When I think about my younger brother was born when I was 17 years old, he was a change of life baby. And so as a disability professional, you know, he was just like his daddy. His daddy couldn't read, so he can't read either. So his diagnosis of dyslexia in a very significant form came very, very late. And that was despite all of our efforts to, you know, going to the school, asking questions, seeking, figuring out, oh, you get an evaluation first. Okay, let's get that evaluation. Well, what happens after you get the evaluation? You know, all those things, and going through those processes, I think is alien in many ways in our community. We're used to sort of coalescing around and supporting each other, but when you get involved in systems, then systems present barriers to access. Even those systems that were specifically designed and developed for access, particularly, I think in communities of color, that kind of thing. So I think that is a challenge that sometimes we don't talk about. There's been some research done about that. It's something I did my master's thesis on many years ago. And so I think that is a challenge. I think that then presents itself in different ways in the church. If we don't have familiarity, if we don't see people with disabilities, it's just until someone presents, and it's like, oh, what do we do with this? You know, what do we do with the young person in Sunday school who isn't a reader? Do we think about that? I often think if we are in a church, if we're in a setting and we don't see disability, people with disability, well, where are they? And then why aren't they there? And and sort of being able to think from that standpoint, what it is we need to do to be both welcoming and accommodating, and ensure everybody in the community can access our community and be a part of the community. I felt called at a very early age. Initially, my work was working with the deafblind and the deaf. I think one of the areas of access that sometimes we don't think about as well, that I feel immensely fortunate is present here at Bethel, is just having leadership that is open to hearing. This is something that is important. So many years ago, when I really began to feel led to begin we called it initially a signing ministry, because what it involved is sort of recruiting people who were interested enough to learn sign language to then learn more about what it means to be unchurched in the deaf community. And research shows that the deaf community is actually the largest unchurched people group in the world. Those are actual statistics. But having the leadership, being able to talk with Pastor Ray, Pastor Gloria, and say, this is really something that's important, and I'd like to start to prepare to offer this service so that we are more accessible, and being told, go for it. It's, oh, okay. It's like, now I have to do it, right? And then doing it, and then saying, okay, we're ready to start. We're ready to be public. And so, okay, what do we need to do to be public? And I mean, I began to realize how rare that was in terms of leadership in churches, just based upon the experience of other interpreters in churches that I have known, and the warnings about, you know, they just warned me about all these things. Well, you know, pastors don't like this, and pastors don't like that, and pastors don't like the other, so you should think this way, that way, the other way. And I didn't find any of those barriers here. There were lots of questions, and just the desire to inquire and be engaged in the conversation, and then provide the supports. We have an incredible media team who over the years, we've really learned, okay, what do we need to do about lighting? Since we started streaming, okay, well, how do we work with that? And it's a process. It's more a journey than a destination. But those things are very important to feel that this is a place, or wherever you are, is a place where we can say, this is something we need to do. How do we engage as a community in thinking about, and including the people who we are attempting to engage, of course, as leaders in those conversations.
Thank you so much. The next question has to do with just resources. So on our call earlier this week, Reverend David was talking about how many of the Black congregations the majority of the Black congregations he supports do not even have the resources to hire a full-time lead pastor. And that really brought to mind some of the significant resource challenges that might be there, and just how we think creatively about addressing those. So that's the backdrop to this question. Even if church congregations really believe in health equity and disability and justice, this question of resources might be pretty formidable. So how do you understand the resource challenges facing congregations, and then how have you seen these challenges constructively addressed?
Well, first of all, let me just express a profound appreciation to Dee when she came to us and offered us the opportunity to have her do signing, and just engaged a whole other community that wouldn't have found a place for themselves. And now, even online, if there is nobody here who is deaf, if you're online, somebody's going to be there, going to be translating. So I would say, yeah, the first place that, in terms of resources, is already in the room, and that's that you have people coming, and the opportunity to really educate them about ableism. Lee, can you just pull up that one slide about? We have Access Sunday, and on Access Sunday we preach and teach about this topic. Keep going, Lee. This is the sermon for the next. Keep going. This is a scripture, of course, and that reminds us that the body, that there are different parts of the body, and the scripture says that we all belong to the body. That every piece. The finger is no more important than the toe, and the elbow is no more important than the baby finger, that every part of the body is important. So it's these kinds of things of reinforcing that, and then making it clear that means that we are all part of the body, and that we all belong here. Just very quickly, Leah, you can keep going. And keep going, yep, keep going, okay. So just look, so this was part of it, is just reminding people what we're talking about in terms of disabilities, the 3 dimensions, keep going there. And then this is ableism, because many of us don't really appreciate the ways in which we are reinforcing ableism, so that when you get on the bus and you know how people are when the bus stops and here comes somebody with the wheelchair and it's like, right? Well, that's ableism. So you might say, well, I'm not that. Well, think again, right? And I can tell you, as my siblings as their diseases were progressing, I had 3 beautiful sisters who, as their disease was progressing, it was becoming more visible in terms of their speech, the slurred speech. Now they require the wheelchair. And I can remember my sister, such a pretty sister, saying, when I was pushing her one time, and she said, you notice how people look at me? They didn't used to look at me that way. Now they look at me and they look down at. So just really educating people about the ways that we are also ableist. This is not just those people's problems. This is us. This is me. So that you can do that even if you don't have a ramp. There's still things that we can do. And then just keep going, Lee. So this is just really, I know you can't see this, but this is, and if somebody wants the sources, forgot to put that in here, but this is really, really important because this is, let me just stand up so I can see this myself, this is an opportunity to just really take an assessment. Our people here, are they participating in all aspects of the congregational life? What are we already doing right now to accommodate them? What do we need to do better or differently? What should we start doing next? So we may not be able to do everything, but we can do something. And this gives us an opportunity to just kind of look at this grid and see where are we. I would say one of our bigger challenges now is with regard to children with autism. Don't even get me started about what's happening. Yeah, don't even take the Tylenol, okay? And so we have a growing number of kids who are in this space. And like Dee says, one of the things that we make very clear is if the child, I know in the old days you would say, you don't do this in church, go take the child out. No, the child, we can figure this out. We can figure out how to accommodate this family, and nobody can, you can't roll your eyes any worse than I can roll my eyes at you for rolling your eyes at this family. So there are ways that we can do that are free in terms of really addressing the issue and being confident that working at developing an inclusive congregation.
I agree. And I also think, perhaps the most important piece of that is just asking people what support or help or access looks like for them. And I'm remembering the testimony of a father who's here who has a son with autism and was a little bit nervous about including his son in, I think it was Vacation Bible School last summer. And he's worried about all the supports and will he be disruptive and will the other kids make friends with him? All the things that you worry about, I think, as a parent about all of your children, but particularly for children with disabilities. And he just talked about how it wasn't that everything went perfectly, but his child was welcomed, was, to the extent support was available, given supports, given the space to roam, was it perfect? Would an autism specialist come in here and sort of tick off everything? Yeah, you're doing everything right. No, but that's also not the point, right? It's about, so for me, in terms of resources, the greatest area of resource for me is raising awareness, as Pastor Gloria said, checking ourselves, looking at who is here, who is not here, and if they are not here, why aren't they here? What is it we need to do? How do we need to raise our awareness about what we are thinking and doing and presenting barriers, whether they are physical or personal? For me, everything starts with awareness, and the extent to which, for example, we would never dream in any of our congregations about saying, oh, well, we can't have people who are not from historically black churches coming to our church. We're a black church, right? It's like, that's just ludicrous. Who would do that, right? But we don't necessarily think that way about people with disabilities, right? It's like, the community is for everyone, and everyone should be present, and everyone should be supported, and we need to engage the whole community in helping us think about what that looks like.
And just one other thing that's really exciting is the data shows that when a church is very intentional about developing a robust congregation that welcomes all people, that in fact other families who do not have necessarily children with disabilities come because there's something happening here. It turns out that everybody feels welcome. So.
Yeah, no, Oh, thank you so much. You're already speaking to some of my questions further down. But I wanted to reflect back, because as you were showing this, Pastor Gloria, I was just thinking about, again, my own experience and how even if sometimes there were congregations that my family attended that would allow for the mat in the back of the room and say, yes, you can be here. I just imagine what a difference it would have made to hear like any kind of articulation of the theological significance or the spiritual significance of being an inclusive community. It was sort of allowed, but then a lot of the engagement with my family was around, well, let's figure out how to pray for your healing. Let's figure out how you being disabled is a theological problem that we need to solve with prayer, as opposed to something that we could allow to grow our theology, to grow our vision of God and our humanity in a way that would build connection, support, and an inclusion. And what I alluded to earlier is I think that disconnect really caused my father and my family that extra level of kind of spiritual suffering to not be able to really name and embrace our experience through any lens other than this is a problem, and if he continues to not be healed, then what does that mean for our faith? What does that mean for our belonging in this community? So the question then really is, how do you, maybe thinking in terms of both messaging and then also pastoral care, how do we sit with families who, even with some of the best institutional efforts towards improving access, still are really wrestling with a tradition that links, that it has stories like who sinned, that this man was born blind, and that really has this kind of pervasive sense of we address suffering broadly and specifically illness and disability through this lens of it needs to be fixed or it needs to be healed.
And again, it's I can think about this in a very personal way. I don't know. I mean, I don't pretend to have a a neat answer that makes it all work together. But what I do know is having consistently with each of these siblings in ways that defy my imagination, operate in a space of grace. And I have so many stories, just in terms of the way they approached it, and beginning with my oldest sister, and just as we were lamenting this diagnosis, and then and her way of making it work was again not necessarily with a neat little package, but what she said was that she didn't understand it, but she was here, and that she would use this as an opportunity for ministry. She did it in a way that was continues to defy, that is hard. But as she continued to lose ground, and she was single, living alone, and we began to think through how to support her. And my father, who had the disease, was at home, and lots of supports and nurses coming in, special beds, a lot of support for him, and that was what he chose. And she said she felt like the Lord was calling her, and this was her way of doing it, of thinking about this as an opportunity to do ministry. So she elected to go into a nursing home at age 50. And she said that she felt like if she by going into the nursing home, it would give her more opportunities to do ministry work. And that's what she did. At the Boston home, she did ministry. Now that was her way of making it work for her. I don't know. Yeah, somebody's got the wisdom, but I got questions here. But what I have also seen over and over and over again is how people, even in the midst, especially in the midst of their challenges, do life and do life well and model for us strength and character and dignity and valor. And so again, I'm not recommending that, but I do know that people find ways that sometimes able-bodied people can't seem to do to model the grace of God.
Somebody out there must have an answer.
Yeah, I certainly don't, but I was having a conversation with someone about this last evening, is that for me, sort of coming into our own understanding that God really is everybody's God, right? He created everyone, and he doesn't create trash, right? And the idea, and that kind of diversity, in a very, very real sense, right? It's real, and just, in terms of our own self-awareness, really being thoughtful about who is it we think is not deserving of God's grace or love, or who do we think is less than because they're not quote unquote able-bodied. Think about that. Do you believe that? And think about whether your actions are consistent with whether or not that is your belief, whether stated or unstated. So it's a hard question, and also thinking in terms of, well, for me, is thinking about how many of you have heard of universal design for learning? Okay, so thinking in terms of universal design, instead of thinking, oh, okay, well, this is what we have, so how do we make it more accessible? Rather thinking, how do we create something that is universally accessible? Like, how do we start from accessibility as opposed to thinking about disability as a backstop, which I know is hard because, none of us were raised doing that. But, and again, asking of the community that we want to engage what that looks like for them, and to engage with us in conversation about that, so that we aren't running ahead and doing something that isn't helpful at all. And there may not be resources, there may not be funds, but there are lots of things that people can do. I'm thinking about some years ago, I worked on a federal grant where I was going into communities, very marginalized communities, urban and rural, around the country, and supporting families who had children with disabilities to sort of conceptualize parent support, information, and advocacy that made sense for their communities. Two of those communities were communities that grew out of the churches that they were attending. And it was just marvelous to be able to see how those churches sort of really support and grew up those organizations, so that there was a place in the community that families could go to if they really needed support around their child's education. But it sort of happened organically. So thinking, I don't know that answers your question, but I'm rambling at this point, so I'm going to turn over the mic.
Thank you both so much for thinking and sharing so deeply with us. Do we have questions from the audience? Yes.
I wrote it down because I was totally going to forget it. So you spoke about developmental and physical disabilities. How do you approach mental health issues and suicide?
Yeah, that which is a whole other aspect so you're talking about in general at this congregation or just in how do we think about? So yeah, so we do mental health as well, and issues in terms of mental health, and people we preach about it from the pulpit. People at Bethel know that between my husband and me, we have 3 therapists: his therapist, my therapist, and our therapist. So we have a strong, robust community of therapists, and absolutely. The same way you might come see me you might bring your child for some physical challenge, then there are also clinicians, specialists, who can support us in terms of our mental health challenges as well. So there's plenty good room. I mean, we are all of these things. And I think part of this is just appreciating the totality of one's being, body, mind, spirit, et cetera, and not defining somebody by any one category, not defining them by whatever the physical disability might be or the intellectual disability, or and we are in our fullness. We are still valuable to God, and we're valuable to the body. So we make room for you. Now there are sometimes when things are disrupted, and we've had some of those situations too. I can tell you how we work some of those situations. But the point is that we all have our struggles. And if the church can't figure out how to accommodate us in our struggles, I mean, what kind of a God would not figure that out or call people to find ways forward for all of us in the midst of our challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to say it's one of the things that I have appreciated most. Is knowing, I mean, the number of times, Pastor Gloria or Pastor Ray will get up, pray for healing, but take your medication. Yeah. Go see your therapist. Don't prioritize one over the other. That this is what real life is about. I have a daughter who has some challenging mental health challenges. And it's important for her to hear that. It's like, you're not broken. God sees you in your need. It's, regardless if it's an arm and a leg or neurological or mental health, that God sees you in that. So I feel blessed to be part of a congregation that does that.
Thank you. I want to add, too, that part of my role at the School of Theology is I'm actually the Dean of Students for the school, and on a weekly basis, I sit with students who have depression, anxiety, sometimes suicidal thoughts, and many of them are coming from a space of being part of churches, in and out of churches, complicated relationships with churches around these issues. And I often, when I sit with them, I really believe that there's a kind of a both and here that has to be held together. It's hard to hold together, but really important, which is that we know that there's physiological bases for depression, anxiety. These are physiological responses in the body, right? And also they are a pervasive indication of just the sickness in our wider society and our wider symptoms, right? So there's this sort of yes, take your medication. Yes, this is physiological. And also, it's an outgrowth of much bigger social problems, right? And I have a diagnosed anxiety disorder that I carried for many years as sort of an individual problem. And this is why kind of a sociological framework really helped me, is think it is something I address through medication, through therapy, and it also is I'm part of a pattern. I'm part of a social pattern of people really struggling in these ways because we do have such inhuman systems that we're operating within, right? Within the church and then beyond it. So that both and has been really, really important for me in supporting students and then just in my own journey as well. So. Yeah, a couple questions. 3 questions. Cut us off, Joe, if we need to. No.
Let me start with a comment and ask a question. The comment is, one of my takeaways from your conversation is the intentionality of what you've done. And it brings to mind this playground in Waltham that became very popular over the summer, which is the most inclusive playground, I think, in all of the United States. Became so popular that they had to sort of like recalibrate how people would have access to it because there were so many people going there. My great-grandson, who's 6 years old, goes there and loves that park. And the intentionality of that policy of that community of Waltham to make that happen, the result is seen, right? And from what you said, the intentionality of doing what you've done here, you can see the results. So now the question is, knowing the challenges and the resources for other congregations and churches, how what you're doing is modeled in a way that others can adapt and or adopt some of what you're doing here that might make their congregations and churches so more inclusive.
That's great.
Yeah, and I can't underscore enough our extreme gratitude to an amazing God that has made this possible. People hear about Bethel, and sometimes they'll hear about us, and they'll come to the church because they've heard about me or Ray. They stay at the church because they meet Joanne, and they see what Joanne is doing, because they meet Dee, and they see what Dee is doing. And so it's a congregation that really does the work. So we're willing to do pretty much anything. Pretty much, right? If we have 3 or 4 people who are willing who catch the vision and are willing to move with it, then we're willing to try to implement it, and to be a resource for other congregations. So that very much is part of what we are able to do. Is we do have people with significant skills, et cetera, so we can again. Suggest to people how we think about the work, how we think about the calling, how we think God is saying, address this issue. And then we're fortunate in that we have people who you can then call on. So I'd say probably half of our counseling load are not people from Bethel. When we go on vacation in August, the people from Bethel don't call us. It's the people from all of y'all churches who be calling us because people at Bethel have, and so we absolutely, we don't own any of this. We can tell you what we've done, what we've learned, what we got right, what we haven't gotten right, and we are more than happy to deploy people. And there are plenty of people who don't necessarily go to church, but who are willing and available to support people in their other congregations. So there's nothing magic about Bethel or whatever. It's just God is great, and the people come, and we just know how to deploy them.
I also wanted to say, as it relates to the deaf ministry here, one of the things that Bethel has done, or that I've done as part of our deaf ministry, is actually invite people from other deaf ministries, other churches. We used to, before the pandemic, we met weekly as a ministry, and we sort of looked at material, and we talked about what it was we were going to do. We practiced with each other. And what we found is there were other deaf ministries, but they sort of didn't have those sort of structures to build and develop skills in place. And so we just invited them to join us. You know, it's like, this is where we are from this time to this time. If you want to send your people, send your people. We'll just hang out and do the same thing together. And because we were so new, we had assumptions that, oh, everybody is doing this because this is how you do it and how you do it. But that wasn't necessarily the case. And now post-pandemic, this sort of group, ad hoc group, is starting to think about, okay, how do we come together again to continue to build support, because people have passed, unfortunately, during the pandemic. People have retired from their ministries, so they're sort of trying to start up from the ground up, as are we, post-pandemic.
Okay, I saw another hand over here.
Thank you. Yes, I was thinking particularly of the terminology itself, disability. I know it's an improvement from handicapped, which is what we used to use. But I know in some circles, people are beginning to question even disability because it doesn't reflect the agency of the people who are disabled. And I was struck by the point made here where it says individuals with significant disabilities and their families needed. Are we experiencing their talents, gifts, and contributions? And then the first panel, of course, emphasized creativity. So I know I've heard of this term, which is differently able instead of disability. And I wonder if, it sounds clumsy, but I wonder if that would be a good substitute. My other question is, or comment is very much linked to the life cycle reality that we all face. That is, as we age, we're all going to experience some disability. And how do we bring that into the conversation?
Certainly. Yeah. Do you want to speak to this, Pastor Gloria?
Sure, and there may be, I'm sure there are other people. Yeah, I actually do like the term differently able, because again, I think what we end up doing is people do have different, they have different skills, talents, et cetera. So just because, you know, my sister wasn't able to walk, wasn't able to articulate, didn't mean that she had abilities, that she didn't have anything. So I do actually like the term, and I've forgotten you. Oh, getting old. Oh, yes. Yeah. There you go. So, yeah, so we are getting old. Okay, yeah, so we, I was telling Jose, he was 75 on August 5th, and I was 75 on August 17th. So once we were young, but now we are old, and when we've never seen the righteous forsaken, et cetera. So so that is, as you can imagine, we are actively engaged in it. When you start a church, you tend to have relatively younger people because old people already have their churches. So we started, and so we are now the old people in the church. We are getting to that place. And yes, and so there are lots of conversations around supporting the needs of our seniors. And really, there are more opportunities. I'd say our seniors feel like they're left out. They feel like they need more. So that's an area in which we need to do more. But we can talk more about what we have in store. And you're welcome to join us if you want to be old too. We got room for plenty of room for us old people. Yeah.
I know that there's more. There are more questions. Yes, we'll move on. Oh. Yes, I see you. You're in line as well.
Yep. So my question, first of all, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. I'm not terribly religious. I am Jewish. So lots of questions. They're obviously always encouraged to question. So my question for you guys is, when you I guess right now with everything that's going on politically and just, we're definitely in a bit of a more progressive bubble here in Boston specifically. When you see this, I would say, resurgence of maybe like a historic use of the church to promote blind faith, to promote unintelligence, lack of education, to promote believing people and taking people at their word, and this weaponization of faith essentially. How do you keep your departure from that? How do you keep your space from that? And how do you continue to encourage people to question what is being told them in this time of religious fanaticism?
Man, as a sociologist of religion, if there's one thing we're interested in right now, it's that. Did you want to speak to this?
Not really.
No?
So we are, I mean, you're right, but this is a very real conversation on so many levels. Certainly within our congregation, we are absolutely largely an African American congregation, and people, and there are plenty of other people. Mark's in here. We got other preachers in here, who feel very keenly the sense of injury. So how do we keep going? One is to stay in the conversation. We talk about this whole thing about calling people in as opposed to calling people out. How do you engage in conversations respectfully with people who think very differently than yourself? There's some practical things like just you ain't got to listen to all the news reports. You ain't got to listen to NPR. You ain't got to listen to Fox. You know what? The sun will come up every morning, even if you don't know what's on the front page of the New York Times. And so really pulling back from some of that. We obviously have significant discussions. Our Bible study is looking, Pastor Ray has launched that, and we've been looking at this most recent issue with this, the death of this young man and all of the implications with that. We are leaning very heavily on the text that for me reminds me that we've seen hard times before, Hebrews 10:35. The people were getting ready to undergo yet another wave of persecution, and the text says that you've been through hard times before and you endured. And the reminder that you don't come from people who give up in the face of challenge. They're people who persevere and are saved. So we are reminding ourselves as a people that this is not new. I don't know that any of us imagined it would get this cray-cray, but it is. And we're not going away. We continue to do our work in terms of social justice. As you probably know, we've done a good bit of work in terms of housing migrant families, et cetera. So we will continue to do what we do and to stay in conversations with people who think like us, and especially stay in conversations with one another to keep us encouraged. I don't know any easy way forward, but we are not going away, and we are not going to stop the fight. We're just not wired for that. So we will stay in the conversation, we will stay in the mix,
Yeah. No, I think about this a fair bit too. It's personal for me because I was raised in a tradition that has now morphed into what we associate with the far right evangelical church, and I've gone through that level of questioning of maybe this is what it always was and always has been, and it's time to just move on. But speaking personally, I've found a liberal, progressive Protestant congregation in Boston, and one of the reasons I can find myself there and really connect is because they're very honest about what's going on, right? We talk about what is Christian nationalism? What does this say about us as Christians? What story do we want to be part of? How do we promote that different story without falling into the us versus them oppositions that are around us, and really holding together? It's this again, it's a both and of try to understand the bigger picture, and then keep your eyes on what you know to do next, right? The work is right there in front of you. It's like, it's in the community. It's in the connections, it's in the people, the communities that are in front of you. And also understand the bigger story, understand what's happening, how it fits into a long history of the United States and who we are as a country. We've gone through these cycles before, but really not lose sight of the steps that are in front of you. Couple other questions. When should we do kind of a hard stop? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. We'll do 2 more questions.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you so much for talking about your genetic diagnosis that's in your family. I'm training to be a genetic counselor, and it's quite common to see patients who are reconciling with their medical journey through religion. And sometimes I see people deny medical care, saying that God wouldn't do this to our family. So I'm curious if you have any advice, or if you've had conversations where you're kind of bridging the medical and the theological gaps, and almost how people navigate that almost.
Okay, yeah, so actually tomorrow's sermon is planning ahead. We're celebrating the 10th anniversary of our work around advanced care planning, and just really excited about that. And much of our conversation tomorrow will be about palliative care. So I often have opportunities to really bridge the challenges of the physical and trying to think through what could God be saying in the midst of that. And it, again, staying in the conversation. What is very clear is that, as I remind people, and this comes up with the planning ahead piece when trying to, or when people have serious illnesses, is that there are scriptures replete with healing stories, and Jesus healed all kinds of people during his time. 2,000 years later, all of those people are gone. And so that there is a space for death and dying. And then the issue is how to support people to do death and dying well and with dignity. And again, I feel like I'm monopolizing this, but we can spend some more time talking about some of the physical illnesses and even some of the mental illnesses and how people have had to wrestle with that, kind of work that through in terms of what is God doing, what is God is saying. And again, our thing is that God continues to work in the context of mental and physical illnesses. These are parts of the cycle of life that that Jesus worked with, and that we continue to work with as well. You guys have got to be bored. I done said everything I know to say.
I think we're coming close to noon, so I think we'll wrap up. Hopefully there's more conversation over lunch. Sister D, did you want to add any final words? You don't. Okay, good. Well, thank you all so much. Thanks to Joe. It's been an enormous pleasure.
This person I'm going to introduce as our keynote speaker. Look at her, she's shy. She's like, no, please don't hold my hand. There's a special reason why we have someone like Teresa Ramos being our keynote speaker. Because on the one side, we need somebody who can advocate, and particularly in this moment in time, where in the face of oppression, silence is not an option. We need people who can stand up and advocate on behalf of all of us so that this society becomes the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, one that is inclusive, diverse, and equitable, and is our beloved community. So we need someone who can do that, but do it from the lens of the law. What is legal? What are our rights? But we also need someone who has a lived experience as a family member and or a parent, because then that lived experience brings agency to the work that they are doing. It's not just work because it's a job, it's coming from the heart and the passion of what they've been asked to do on earth. And so it's with great honor and pleasure and privilege that I introduce to you our keynote speaker for this afternoon. I don't know if you want to stand here or you want to stand over here, but wherever you feel the most comfortable, will you please welcome our keynote speaker, Tere Ramos, attorney.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm gonna wheel this over a little bit. So, well, first of all, thank you. I'm gonna make a motion that next year, after all of those arroz y habichuelas, that we have a little salsa before the keynote. So everybody is all. If you need to stand up, move. Feel free to do that. Thank you so much, Jose, and thank you so much for having me. I want to be conscious of everybody's time, and I'll tell you, I have to be in a panel afterwards. I am the mom, and I'm going to talk about it, of a young woman with a disability, and Kathy is with her respite worker, and I will turn into Cinderella with her pumpkin at 2 p.m., so I'll start the panel, and then I'll scooch out of here, and our other expert on the panel, who's a much bigger expert than I am, will be able to continue the work. So let's start the slideshow, and I want to start with a line from Shakespeare's Henry VI. And it's one that you've probably heard before. It says, the first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. And this line is most of the time quoted as a joke, as if Shakespeare was confirming the zeitgeist, you know, the general idea that lawyers are nasty, lawyers are greedy, and we therefore must get rid of them. But in the play, what happens is that Henry VI is going to be overthrown. And those that are plotting the overthrowing know that they have to first kill all the lawyers, because as long as lawyers exist, there's going to be defenders of justice and of the system, and for people that are standing between the powerful and the powerless. So the whole point is exactly the opposite, is that they know that lawyers are an integral part of defending the systems of justice and equality in a functioning government. And this truth has very much shaped my own journey in the disability world. I was thinking, I gave you a PowerPoint, but I'm sorry, he's doing the slides, and I'm confused, he's not. I was like, do we need to change the slide? But you can leave it there, thank you. So I never set out to become a lawyer. I come from a family of lawyers. My dad always thought that any job, as long as you were a lawyer, you were so much better at it. You wanted to be a garbage collector, but if you were a lawyer, you would truly understand how governments and systems and municipalities and trash collecting would work, and therefore, you should also be a lawyer. And being the third child of the house, I was like, no way I'm going to toe the line. I'm going to carve my own path. And so I did. I went to grad school. I worked in intellectual property law. I lived abroad. And then in 2004, everything changed. When my daughter, who at the time was about 2 years old, I have another one that's 15 months younger, I started noticing that she was developing differently. And I had to change my plans. I was living in northeastern China, working in international intellectual property law. I know that sounds like a really riveting profession. I thought it really was at the time. But I have to move back to the US and start to understand what was going on, start understanding her disability, which at the time we weren't even sure, because she was a baby. She was barely 3 years old, right? And from there, start advocating, right? I had to start getting medical appointments, and we were kicked out of a hospital's lobby once because this security guard came and said, Your daughter is making others upset because she was so anxious and she couldn't use her words. She was crying. It was a little baby crying, and we were kicked out. And then I had to start advocating for services. And I remember, looking at my husband and saying, I don't understand. I am so privileged. I have a wealthy college education. I have a master's in foreign service. My husband, we met at Georgetown. I joked that I got a joint master's in foreign service, MRS degree at Georgetown. And then we got married, and he went to business school. And this is the hardest thing we've ever done. And how does any Latina mom, someone that may have had to leave Puerto Rico like so many millions have done, seeking a better life with little education, and goes to a district that's already underperforming, even have a fighting chance at this, right? How does it make it happen? And, what I learned as I started volunteering as a parent advocate and working with Latino parents is that, my dad had a point. And I started to understand what my dad said, and I started to understand why we want to kill all the lawyers. And that is the incredible harsh reality of disparities that exist in this country. The truth is our government systems are not just complicated. They're inequitable by design. And for families of color, immigrant families, or families living in poverty, these barriers multiply. So I'm going to give you some examples of this inequity. In 2022-23, the number of students ages 3-21 who received education, special education, or other services was about 7.5 million. And that's about 15% on average nationwide. And of those, 14% are Hispanic or Latino. So we are about the average. We're not, that sounds good so far, right? But the reality is that many are not identified early enough, or they're misidentified because of language barriers or because of lack of the ability of the parent to understand how to even start seeking services. And then there's huge disparities based on states themselves and how the states perceive these students or how their systems are set up. So for example, if you look at this table, and I know it's kind of hard to see because it's small, even though it says 14% Hispanic, Latino, 15% is the average, in Pennsylvania, New York, and Maine, the percentage of students who are receiving services for special education is 21%. Versus in Idaho and Hawaii, it's 12%. And if you go to other jurisdictions like Puerto Rico, it's 37%. And if you go to the Mariana Islands, 11%. And if the Virgin Islands, 9%. So, what makes you understand that is that there's no answer, right? Are we overrepresenting students in places like Puerto Rico and therefore segregating kids? Or are we underdiagnosing kids because we don't believe that we need to give them the attention and the services that they deserve? Now we do move to the next slide. Okay, so when it comes to English language learners who have a disability and receive special education, there's also inequities. So this bar is for California. If you look at English fluent students receiving special education in California in 2022-23, it's about 13%. But if you're an ELL student, you are bound to receive a higher percentage. Now, whether that is because they acknowledge the PTSD that migrant and communities have, a lot of young kids that come through the border, I mean, who would not have some kind of traumatic experience out of that? Are they getting what they need, and that's why it's harder because, higher because of that? Or are we over-analyzing because of, again, the language gap? We don't know, right? How many kids with dyslexia are getting services? Or how many kids who are Spanish speaking, they say, oh, he must be dyslexic, he's not reading well. And it's like, no, he doesn't read well because Spanish is his first language. He just needs to learn how to read in English and get the services that they need. So it's a tricky question. Now, when it comes to outcomes for those kids as they grow older, next slide, we look at the school-to-prison pipeline. And in that case, Black, Indigenous, people of color, students with disabilities are disproportionately suspended, expelled, or pushed out of school altogether. And over half of all black students with autism are in sub-separate classrooms, therefore they don't have access to mainstream classrooms. That's double the rate of white children, and over 40% of Latinx students are in sub-separate classrooms compared to 11% of the general education. So these disparities, unfortunately, don't stop at graduation, right? Because education is the base of our adult life. So when we look at what does that mean in terms of becoming a student with a disability into an adult with a disability, I apologize if I'm speaking fast. I'm trying to, it's like that plane that goes 500 miles per hour because they were delayed at the gate. I'm trying to get us to the gate on time. But, but when you look at working adults with disabilities, Native Americans actually have the highest disability rate among working age adults by race, ethnicity. Latinos have 8%, white 11%, and black 14%. Now, these are working age adults rather than just all of the population. When we look at health and wealth disparities, again, these vary a lot by state, right? So nationally, black individuals have a higher disability rate. In some states, it's almost 2.5 times higher than their white peers. However, in some states where we have better access to healthcare, for example, Connecticut, blacks have the same or lower disability rates than whites. Adults with disabilities are twice as likely to live in poverty, 20% compared to 12% for those with the disabilities. There are higher rates for black and Latino individuals, and educational attainment is often also affected by race. Latino and black individuals with disabilities have much lower college graduation rates than their white and Asian peers. And the last interesting thing that I'm going to talk about is that among the 100 largest metropolitan areas, the places with the strong economies and well-educated populations have the lowest disability rates. And the question is, are we self-selecting and we have strongest economies, better educated people, lower disability rates because they're gentrified communities that do not allow rents or space for people with disabilities and therefore they're shut out of those communities? Or do we have better outcomes because they have better access to healthcare and better access to systems, whereas in rural communities, these individuals, just flounder. They don't have the same access. And that's just an important point to consider and for individuals to study and to think about. So why does this matter? We're not there yet, but you're good. Why does this matter? As I mentioned to you, I became a lawyer after being a mom and understanding the system, right? My daughter is now 24, and I actually went to law school when she was in grade school. I was the old lady of the class. I also have another daughter who is 15 months younger, and she is neurodiverse. She identifies as neurodiverse. However, while the oldest one has developmental disabilities, receives DDS services, she was in special education services. My younger one just graduated summa cum laude from Wellesley College. So what tells you is you can have a disability and you have very different outcomes. Even within a family, I have both sides of the spectrum. What is really hard is, in the case of my older daughter, I did everything by the book, right? I started out, I became that fierce mom that was up till 2 a.m. learning. Then I went to law school, and I went to a really competitive law school, and I left it all behind and became a lawyer, did everything by the book, sued when I had to, right? Set everything up, thought about adult services, and guess what? She turned 22, which is the day when on your 22nd birthday, you age out of special education services, so I picked her up in her residential program, packed up her room, and she had nothing. There were no services. The system is broken. I had to bring her home. Carol, who was at PYD, she probably remembers, right? I brought her home. I had to start like she was 3 years old all over again. I had no medical support, no day program, no residential program. I had to rely on every single teacher who had ever come to babysit for me in the past to call and start mining and finding a new system of support. I struggled. We put her in a day program. I had to take time off work to pick her up and drop her off. And then we placed her in a DDS house that where I had to even file in the Commission Against Discrimination and in the Commission for Protection for People with Disabilities until a year and a half later, we finally got her the services that she was entitled to due to her level of disability based on DDS determination. And I am one of the lucky ones. I got to do that. The lines are enormous. The need, if you talk to the young adult disability community in terms of day programs and access to doctors and everything, they're incredible, right? So that's not just my family story. It's the story across the country. In Massachusetts, we're so incredibly proud of our healthcare system. It's still the case. Our children with disabilities, especially BIPOC children with disabilities, are still invisible. And these are children who deserve dignity and access and education and community, and we are still failing them as much as we're failing adults that go through that system as well. So at this current in time, I value and I appreciate Jose's comments about where we are in our society at this moment with our current political and social climate. When I hear that Shakespeare's line, let's kill all the lawyers, I don't hear it as a joke. I hear it as a real threat. That's where I see as where we are right now. Because the individuals right now, the system is being moved and is being shifted to benefit even more from that inequity and to continue to silence through violence and through politics everything that we have built. So they know that families have no advocates, no way of moving things, no power, no allies, basically, no lawyers, and they're taking, if you look at the news stories day to day, that's what we see. So when families do have someone on their side, someone who knows the law or someone who knows the policy, like you guys are here, or someone who insists that they be heard, then justice is and it's going to be possible. And that's why we have to do the work. So here's my call to action for you guys today. This is what I'm going to leave you with. So basically, we cannot sit back, hope that inequities are going to fix themselves. Unfortunately, we tried that in November, didn't work out. So we either just strap on our bootstraps, get to work, or we're just going to keep sliding down. We need to act together, and it's urgent. So the first one is we must act together with urgency. That's first and foremost, right? The second one is demand language access. Everyone has a right to receive information in a language they understand. Again, we see it with so many immigrant communities that are being broken right now through violence. Invest in culturally competent providers. Services need to reflect not only disability and the medical needs, but they need to reflect the cultural and linguistic needs of the communities that they're serving. So many of our children are misdiagnosed or not diagnosed because people don't understand how a cultural nuance might affect how a child develops. We need to train and pay direct support workers. They're the backbone of our medical community and our disability community. My daughter cannot go out into the community because the people that support her in the house as staff, they're all immigrants. And they're afraid that what's going to happen when she goes to Walmart with them and they come and they try to arrest them. And they're standing there with two young adults with disabilities that one of them is nonverbal, the other one could never come home, right? Or call home. They are professions of dignity. We don't pay them enough. We don't train them enough. We let them burned out, and then we blame them for what goes wrong in the system. We need to hold systems accountable. I think that's why we're all here. So that's the first step. But again, schools, healthcare providers, agencies, we need to get them to more than just comply with the law, and I know that right now that's a really tall order. And the last one is embrace disability as part of the human experience. I think that's why PYD is here. And I'm very proud to have been a part of PYD because we always said that disability is part of the human experience. We are all disabled at some point in our lives, right? My mom was never disabled. She's 84 now. She doesn't think she needs hearing aids, but sure she does. She knows she had a retinal detachment years ago. She can't see, and now she fell 2 weeks ago, and now she can't walk. So whether she wants to embrace it or not, she has a disability, and it's affecting her life. And if we can either fight that and then have her limit her life, or we can start living as a society to embrace it and make changes, so when we all get to that point, there's ramps and everything we need so we can all continue to live our life. So, in sum, the last and most important thing I'm going to leave you with is do not leave this work to a few. And that's when that happens, that's when we lose. Each of us here, we each have a role to play, whether it is as a parent, whether it is as a caretaker, a medical provider, a policy person, a lawyer. Ask yourself in every space that you enter, who is not here, whose voice is not being heard, and what will I do to change that? So in closing, we're way over time. I apologize. I'm hoping, I don't want to say it's my dream, but it's really more my hope because I have an expectation that it should happen. When a family like mine walks into a school or a clinic or a community center, that they don't have a huge wait list, that they don't feel invisible, that they will be seen, respected, and served. And that day is not going to come by accident. It's only going to happen if we continue to do this work, if we stand up, if we show those that are conspiring against us that we are unafraid, unrelenting, and unwilling to accept inequity as the normal. So that is how I hope we ensure and we honor the dignity of every family. That's how we're going to build a community, and that is how we're going to build and continue to build the bioethics and the health equity that we are all here seeking to talk about and to learn from. So thank you for your time. I know we're really short on time, so okay, thank you. I'll move this in the meantime while you get set up with the...
Teresita, thank you so much. We can give her another round of applause. That was incredible. I'm going to bring up Casey Rojas to the mic. You will be introducing our next panel. This is Bioeticando Fireside Chat, 35 years of ADA, disability justice, legal struggles, and the future of access. Take it away, Casey.
Thanks so much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back here yet again with a panel of fantastic individuals. I know the conversation today has been heavy, has been light, and has been fun. We are here to continue this conversation and provide you a little bit of a legal background on the ADA, which was a triumph 35 years ago in 1990. This is, of course, not the only piece of legislation targeted toward individuals with disabilities, but it perhaps was the most memorable and most impactful in our nation's history. So I'm going to pass it back over to our keynote speaker to give us a little bit of a rundown on how we got to the ADA, what it means for our communities, and what's left to be done.
So the disability rights movement starts in the United States as a result of the Vietnam War and the civil rights movement of the 60s. Individuals see how peaceful civil disobedience and the request for rights had a positive effect of moving the needle in the United States in the 60s. Then we ship off thousands of young men to the Vietnam War, many of whom come back disabled, and disenfranchised, because not only did they lose a lot of their ability and become disabled, but also the country is in a place that we hate them, right? We're disdainful and ungrateful for the sacrifice that they had made. And that sparks the disability civil rights movement. They start taking over buildings in California. They go to Congress. They do situations. They also go and they try to take over Greyhound buses because they're still not accessible 50 years later. But the idea was that they asked for something that would allow them access into those federal buildings that a veteran should have access to. And so in 1975, after a lot of back and forth and pushing, they passed Section 504. Section 504 is basically a law that requires buildings and entities that receive federal funding, so only federal funding, to have access. And that access may be architectural barriers, but there are also other barriers. You have to think about what constitutes access, right? For someone who has a walker, an access issue might be more the ramp and the need for that. In the case of my daughter who has a disability, it may be that she doesn't have to stay in court for as long as another person, or it may mean that you get materials in Braille, right? Or that you have closed captioning and all of that. So that happened, and the result was that we saw really the needle to start moving forward. But the problem was that anywhere else in the country that you went to, that still didn't exist. So after decades of, again, fighting, in 1990, the Bush administration passed the ADA. The largest difference between the ADA and Section 504 is that ADA includes private individuals, private organizations. So whereas if you were going to take a city bus, it would fall under Section 504, and they have to provide, ramp or a way for you to get into the bus because they receive federal funding. If you're taking Greyhound and they're a private company, now under the ADA, Greyhound should be providing that access. Or if you go into a city building to see your council person, that ramp needed to exist there. Nowadays, if you go to McDonald's, you need to have a ramp to go into the store. Section 504, or more specifically the ADA, had 5 sections. Each of the sections dealt with a different area. So section 1 was employment, right? Then another one, there's, schools and other organizations. There's private individuals. There's architectural barriers. There were telephone services. And now it has been upgraded most recently in 2010 to include architectural issues. And during the Biden administration, they actually did an update for internet services, because in 1990 there was no internet, for those of us that are old enough to remember that we actually sent letters back then. So that is the background on the ADA, and I'll just pass on the conversation.
Thank you so much for that quick orientation to the law here. I don't anticipate that everyone in the room is a lawyer, so that's why we felt it was helpful to have this context, to understand where we are now. I think it's very easy to forget that the world didn't look like it does now just a short 35 years ago in 1990 when the ADA was passed. Many of us are much older and have seen the world before ramps were at every entrance, before every building was accessible. So this is a testament to what was needed, what was necessary. And as Tere was talking about, how we got there was a real social movement, and really took a lot of organizing and advocating. And so now I want to pass it over to Nia, who is a little bit of a health policy expert over here, to see what we can learn from the movement that brought along the ADA and where we go next, perhaps.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here to chat with you guys. Also, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. I'm getting a little
We're good.
Okay, I'm gonna give you guys can hear me okay. I think this is really important. And I also think this question of, where are we headed and why did it happen matters so much. I think we can be very presentist nowadays, right? In assuming that all of these benefits that kind of become invisible to us over time, if you aren't old enough to remember a time that did not exist, can feel very like small potatoes, right? Like they can feel like things that didn't matter. And I think one thing we are learning from this particular political moment is that, it is possible to go backwards. It is indeed possible. And there are many things that people took for granted that we're all going to learn. We're just going to get a first-hand civics lesson during this administration to understand the importance of many of these legal and, legislative changes that were made on behalf of marginalized people. But one thing I think that's important to take from the development of the ADA is understanding the moment that you are in, right? Teresita was absolutely right to bring up that, when folks viewed the benefits of the civil rights movement and how they were able to keep it forward, that it was a good opportunity to see if we could possibly capitalize on that to actually expand our understanding of equality. And I think understanding the moment you're in is really critical. What's interesting about what we think about disability ethics in comparison to other political and social issues is that to some extent, disability ethics touches people at, a number of different stages of their life, right? That these are people that we know and we see on a regular basis. And there's so many many different disabilities that we don't really think about that are quite visible. So whether you have autoimmune disease, whether you have diabetes, heart disease, like all of these things legally are considered to be disabilities. And so there's a benefit of proximity, right? And so I think that's something that can always be capitalized upon. Whereas we look at this current political moment, where I think there were many folks who thought, oh yeah, we can just hinge on to the political movement of Black Lives Matter, for example, it actually didn't necessarily succeed. And part of that is due to the fact that, most folks are not in contact with minorities. They're not necessarily in contact with, openly LGBTQIA people. And so people have the ability to kind of push that discourse out of the way because they are people that they spend time. It's like we live in a relatively segregated country. That is unfortunately by design. And so we kind of met some friction when it came to pulling people over the line into equality. So I think really taking into account the circumstances that allow for things to move forward is really critical. And that kind of dovetails to my second point about how do you harness that type of movement again and build inclusion, right? And some of this is through reminding people that no, these folks are our peers and actually we all benefit when these systems are in place. So for example, like we could look at something like Medicaid reimbursement, which is really a complicated way to say how physicians are paid by Medicaid beneficiaries. Medicaid beneficiaries, or rather Medicaid reimbursement rate is very, very low, much lower than like your Blue Cross Blue Shield, your Aetna, or anything along those lines. And that directly impacts, folks who are disabled. It does impact the Black community, and this is a reason why LACOs have been harnessing all of their skills to try to address inadequate reimbursement rate. It impacts physicians. The physicians have been doing this as well. But there are opportunities for intersectional collaboration to figure out, how can we all come together, because a poor reimbursement rate hurts all of us and will hurt all of us at a point. And so understanding how these movements worked, how they were harnessed, how they were brought together, what is working right now and what is not working right now are really important when we think about how do we move things forward. I think there are many people who believe that things will just move forward because they will it. And what they don't understand is that inequality in this country is very deep-rooted. Very, very, very deep-rooted. It is not just something that because you drilled it or because you tweeted about it or because you shared something online, it will change. There are powers that be that have set these tones and dynamics and norms in motion for reasons that ultimately benefit them. And so be mindful about the conditions that actually create change rather than just demanding change without much strategy is something that many of us could keep in mind.
Thank you, Nia. Well said. One of the things you touched on there a little bit was the legal definitions of disability. And Terry, one of the things you were mentioning before is where the law fell short in the disparities that we saw on the screen just a few moments ago. So where we are now in terms of what is a disability under the law and what can we do to improve the definitions and the protections afforded under the law?
So that's a great question, and that's something that because we wanted a quick recap, I was like, I don't know how much do I get into this. So I always say as a lawyer and as a manager, because I've done a lot of systemic work, it's a plan is only as good as its implementation. Then the second thing I learned in law school, I had this professor that he always had this term. My daughter thinks it's funny because she's an English major and I've taught her on it. It's semantic hygiene. So we often come up with these really ambiguous terms and then we leave them to the courts to determine what they are, right? So when it comes to the ADA, a person with a disability is either a person that has a condition or is perceived to have a condition that minimizes the ability to perform an activity or something of life. So it could be that you have problem reading, or you have problems walking, or you have problems breathing, or you have problems swimming, or anything, like you have problems seeing or hearing. Those are all disabilities. So it's really, really general, and that's a big part. The second part that I thought is really interesting of the ADA is that then it talks about you can request, if you have a disability, a reasonable accommodation. And again, that was they just threw it out there, and you're thinking, well, what's reasonable to you might be completely unreasonable to me because I don't want to pay anything to do it, right? So over the years, the courts have been working on that, and they basically said, as long as it's something that it doesn't break the law, that it's doable. So I'll give you an example. If you go in Central Square, there's all these businesses that are right on the sidewalk, and they all have like a little step up. They're completely inaccessible to people in wheelchairs. The Cambridge Commission has been complaining about, Disability Commission has been complaining about it for years. But because the architectural standards of what a ramp needs to do, that ramp would be in the sidewalk, and therefore it can't happen because it goes against the law. Or a mom and pop shop might say, it's so expensive for me to put that ramp up, it's going to bankrupt me, so therefore that's not a reasonable accommodation. So this is where the law and the lawyers start to make it harder for folks that don't understand or don't have access to lawyers or anything else to limit the access, right? Because maybe I have the means to be more thoughtful and make the complaint because I know the law, but if I'm just that user in the wheelchair that goes to the Cambridge Disability Commission, I may have no recourse, right? That's where it goes. So usually the three tenets that are most important is a reasonable accommodation, what is a person with a disability, and the third one is that it doesn't cause hardship to the organization or the place that's putting it together. So anyway, I'll pass it back to you, but again, I think that's the hard part has always been, where do we see the limits of these terms and who sets those terms? And as you're seeing with the Supreme Court, how we see it is to dial back something that's been considered a reasonable term.
Thank you for that answer. And I think it's something that really underlines the work of a bioethicist, is where to draw the line. Yeah. It's also the work of lawyers and lawmakers. How do we draw the lines? Where do we draw the lines? What does it mean to be disabled? I think this is a really interesting question brought up that you mentioned with the ADA, classifies a disability as one having a disability or being seen as having a disability, bringing in a social community component to the definition of a disability. So if you're not familiar with what the social model of disability is, it is that if you are living with a disability, you are being disabled by society. It is not a condition within you that makes you disabled, but it is the conditions of a community, of a society that disables you. And for that point, I want to pass over to Nia to talk a little bit about community and what it means within a disability advocacy realm and health policy, how it can be improved through community and changing ideas of disability.
Yeah, so I think some of this is just introducing people to concepts of disability, right? Like, I think what's really, fabulous about what was just said is thinking about, all the legal parameters that go into building disability law. And in many other areas of the law, especially civil rights law, what we tend to see is that we're really excited about this one major piece of legislation that seems to make all the difference. And it does, right? Because it was not there before. But then when it comes down to policy evaluation, we find out that maybe it's not working as well as we thought, right? And so it requires additional work to actually make it high functioning for other people. And the way that we actually do that is through community work, right? And thinking about, what does community advocacy look like when we're targeting the actual issues here? So for example, if the issue is, for example, like bankrupting, a small business, right? I mean, this is what happened with the Affordable Care Act, right? The idea that small businesses had to pay for insurance for people. And so small businesses were like, you can't afford that. Like, you can't afford to pay for insurance for our employees. That's why we don't offer it. And so what the Obama administration did at the time is actually provided the state of Massachusetts, either Romney Care, et cetera, is for a number of different parameters. They provided subsidies to help people offset the cost of providing this benefit. And so if you were in community with folks who are experiencing a disability and you have a thriving small business community as well, maybe this becomes this opportunity for you to write a grant, for example, to your state and local government and say, hey, it's like a number of buttons and we could do construction on the small businesses here to offset the cost of making this environment more friendly to individuals who are disabled, right? That those are some of the things that you can actually do as community members. But I think the key is actually being mindful about who you're trying to target and who you're trying to help. I think, again, right now, and that's because many of us who care about social issues, who are raised in a generation of activism, right? And we're living in like the equivalent of the 60s, right? Where people are being exposed to social issues rapidly everybody wants to be involved, everybody wants to fix something. The problem is that folks are throwing arrows at so many different things at once that we're losing effectiveness. And so the beauty of community interaction and helping, normalize living with a disability or inviting people fully into society is through the lens of actually figuring out, well, what does your immediate community need? And like I said, for a community that has a ton of small businesses, maybe you need that subsidy, right? And maybe that's the thing that makes all the difference. However, if you're in a community, for example, that maybe has more of a corporate presence, right? And we talk like Silicon Valley, we talk like RTI in North Carolina, right? These are corporate investors, these are corporate companies. And so you have to engage with them differently to figure out, well, how can we actually turn this into, an inclusive environment? And one more thing to keep in mind, we talk so much about the law, and I know we're all lawyers, and, it's easy to keep talking about the law because that's our wheelhouse, but I think it's also worth understanding, as Terry C. said, which is so thoughtful, is understanding the limits of the law. And so some of these changes will just happen through private entities, right? Like sometimes you have a CEO of a major company who just cares about this issue, and so you can just do what you can to leverage that interest for a period of time. And there's no shame in that. Is it necessarily a permanent solution? Not necessarily, but as we're seeing in this moment, the law is not a permanent solution either. As much as we can roll it forward, we can roll it back. And so it's okay to say, maybe we need a couple of different avenues to make the world a more inclusive place for individuals who have a disability. Some of that may be private, some of that may be public, some of that may be legislated. But it's still all valid in helping making our communities a more inclusive place.
Thank you, Nia. Yeah, I think this is a really important point, especially as we sit here under the title Disability Ethics in the Public Square. And you all coming together as a community today, organizing as a community today, what it really means to make change in the community. We just heard about subsidies, grants, money for building ramps. That's a lot of economics and finance talk about how to make disability less of a problem, right? But there are other ways to think of disability that don't even frame it as a problem to begin with. Certainly not ones that require money to fix. How do we change the social stigma, the community support? We are here with Prospera Institute. Myself, as a Latino, one of the most important things in my community of fellow Latinos, food, music, dance. But what about those who are impaired in their experience in the community of those same things? If we have dance halls that are only for those who are moving around on their feet, if we have music that is only heard and not felt, a community can help music be felt, can help movement look different. So on the dance floor, in the food halls, I think that is something we need to think about ourselves, is how we see others in our community and how we can include them in all of the culturally important aspects of our daily living and celebration. So I want to pass it over to you, Terry, for anything you have to say about that community.
Yeah, I love that, and that segues really well when I talked in my keynote about normalizing disability as part of the human experience. How many of you guys watched The Crown on Netflix? And how many of you guys turned the subtitles on because you were like, dude, I'm not so sure about that English on The Crown? Raise your hand. I am guilty as charged, okay? So that was created originally by WGBH for individuals that were deaf or hard of hearing, and it's become normalized, right? I watched the Bad Bunny concert last weekend, and mind you, I went in person, I watched it every weekend on TikTok, all these people had his illegal lives and everything. I still turn on the subtitles. It's a great thing to have. It's part of we've normalized something, and that is a huge element of universal design. When we design buildings and we think of lights, and we think of spaces, and we think of what is the best way. I was telling you about how my mom fell, and now my sister is struggling. I had a fight with my dad about 15 years ago when they were doing things in the house, and I said, she's visually impaired. You need to put different kitchen counters and set up things differently, and he pushed back because I was doing a course on universal design. And now that my kids have just left the house, I'm talking to my husband. I'm thinking, we need to build an elevator. I told him that. He almost had a heart attack. But I was like, someday, what if I broke my hip? Like, I need an elevator so I can get to my room. But more seriously, it was like, how do we look at the next 20 years now that our kids are empty nesters and adapt our house for where we are as a family, right? I don't need toys all over the house anymore. Please clean out your stuff from your room so I can turn it into a cat shelter or a yoga studio. But also, how do I make sure that I don't fall down the stairs or I can see the buttons on the microwave? And so think of that same way for society, right? When we have subtitles, when we have large font, when we have spaces that allow people to sit down, when we have handles that work, and you just go ahead and install the handles and they work for everybody. You're not disabled, you can still use the darn handle. And if you're disabled, great. You don't have to be asking someone to flush that toilet for you. So I think that's a really big part of how do we just turn society into a way that it's not just specifically designed and it becomes that burden. Part of the idea of doing the ADA was, I think, in the idea of the minders was, how do we create a universal concept for the world? And we're still thinking in terms of what is good for me, but not good for the next one. I mean, we're seeing it now in all areas of society, but I think that is the essence of disability. Like, how do we include as many people as possible in whatever we do?
I think that's so important. Seeing humans as humans who have a right to participate in a community just as much as any other human in that community or society. Fantastic point, especially about thinking about how we reframe our thinking of community and individuals. So Nia, the question I have to you to leave our attendees with is, as we all sit here today and think about reframing our conceptions of disability, within ourselves, within our own minds, how do we think of this as a bioethicist, as a lawyer, as health policy activists and advocates? What do we do to make the change that we certainly believe in, that we can think of in our heads, but we don't necessarily know how to take that next step? What is that next step, and how can we be activists in this realm?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. And, I want to come with a bit of, something that may be considered a downer, but then also leave us with hope. I really loved everything that was said by Kirosika earlier. I mean, I think it's so important. But I think the other piece of this that's equally as important is to understand that anything right now politically that encourages inclusion is essentially seen as a liberal dog whistle, right? And, since, this conference is taking place in Boston, so you guys have the benefit of being in a predominantly blue space where people have the opportunity to, have this type of conversation and feel very comfortable with it and feel very included. But in many of the places that I do work, like I live in North Carolina, I'm from the DC area right now, which has, been in a very adversarial position with the president, all of these other places, whenever you start talking about any form of inclusion, it turns into something where, folks who potentially are on the moderate to far, well, not the moderate, really like the right to the far right, or folks who, have defaulted into the right politically because they feel like they cannot meet the standard of the left, which is its own thing that I think that we understudy, they just bow out, right? And so when we think about creating a more inclusive world, we may have to start rethinking some of the language and recognize, how we are being perceived as well, especially when we talk about organizing in mass, like something that I'm a professor by trade, and so what I tell my students is that democracy is a group project, right? You can't just push people out of the group because you feel like they don't understand what you're talking about. We learned firsthand that when democracy is not treated like a group project, you will not move forward, right? And Massachusetts is not the only place that decides an election, right? You need a Texas, you need an Iowa, you need a North Carolina, you need an Idaho, you need a California, you need a Florida, right? And so that means that when you are going out and doing this advocacy work, different things are going to resonate with different people, right? There may be parts of, for example, Louisiana that don't understand what you mean when you say creating a more ableist society. Like that phrase alone already dog whistles liberal. They don't understand me. They're going to tell me I'm doing something wrong. I can't belong, et cetera, et cetera. And so they've stopped listening. Right, like you've lost legislators, you've lost advocates, you've lost all of these other people. But if you go in and you start off by talking about, okay, well, how many of your Medicaid beneficiaries are, receiving dialysis? right? Because that is a disability, right? When you have kidney disease and you are on dialysis, that is considered a disability under the ADA. If you go in and you ask them, okay, how many people here have high blood pressure? Right? Like, this is how you start changing the narrative. And so when you start talking about implementing these type of universal adaptations, they actually are more palatable because they aren't using the dog whistles that are there. I think that folks think that dog whistles can only go in a negative direction. Like, we've only talked about it really when it comes to race and politics. But there is a liberal dog whistling that's happening as well that is cutting off collective discourse around advocacy. And so some of that means stretching yourself and figuring out, well, what do communities actually need? And if you think of even states like North Carolina, like Alabama, the way that they started expanding Medicaid, even Tennessee, was through using these kind of back channels and different ways of communicating around health and health advocacy and health policy to move these policies forward, right? Like, most people don't think of Tennessee as a state that has some form of expanded insurance coverage because they did not expand insurance under the Affordable Care Act. What most people don't know is that Tennessee actually covers insurance under Medicaid for many more people, much higher, well above the poverty level. I believe it may, if the U.S. is standard, I think it's like 130%. Tennessee may be somewhere between 230 and 250 last I checked about the poverty level of who they cover. Their whole stipulation, however, on who they covered was simply that they did not want to take federal funds to do so, right? That's a discourse issue, right? Like, that is a dog whistle issue, right? Like, if you're thinking about things that resonate with conservative voters, part of it is not having a ton of government spending. Right. And so the way that they decided they were going to cover pregnant women, they were going to cover children who are on foster care until the age of 26. The way that they were going to cover many other groups of people was by using the rhetoric that their people could understand. And, I know that's not like the sexiest answer. But I think that all of us have left, COVID and said, well, we just want to do a full press to inclusion. And I believe that we should. But if we're talking about doing this at the national level, right, this is a group project. Right? There are people who have stigma towards individuals who are disabled. Stigma is very difficult to remove. Sociologists have studied this for a long time. Racial advocates, especially in the Black community, have studied this for a long time. And they have found that it's hard to get people to buy into believing that the us is not just a them. Like, we are a collective. And so we have to use everything at our disposal to make our environments more inclusive. And some of that means learning the ways that people resonate with tones of disability, even if it doesn't sound the way that it may sound, on our best day. So that's what I would leave you guys with today.
Thank you so much for that answer, Nia. I really appreciate it, and thank you for spending your time with us today. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and Teresita, and to all of you in the audience today. It's always so fantastic to be here amongst friends, amongst family, amongst this community in this beautiful house of worship. So thank you for being with us. I really appreciate all of your attendance and your attention, and I look forward to working with you in the future. So stay in touch.
The focus of this panel discussion is on partnerships, and partnerships through the lens of education, through the lens of research, and how those partnerships are helping to move the work related to disability and really accessibility forward. We'll start first, though, with introductions. I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. Keep in mind our distance bias. We'll actually start with those who are on the video. And Ms. Cannon, if you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your story, the work that you do, and what excites you about being in the space with us today.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Icy Cannon, and I'm the Access Manager at Morehouse School of Medicine. And so I oversee the Accessibility Office. And I've been at Morehouse for about 2 years. This was my first time in this space. And so it's been a true and exciting learning opportunity for me. And the one thing that truly excites me about being in this space is that I am able to support students, particularly the ones that need accessibility, to put them on an equal playing field to success and to access. But at the same time, when helping them, I am also helping other students too, because there may be students that don't always advertise that they may have a disability. And so when we support a student with a disability, whether it's hidden or physical. In essence, we're supporting all students. And so that's what really excites me, because I always tell everyone when I'm working in this space, I am at service to the students. And so that's very important to me. So that would be probably the best thing about working in this space for me.
Thanks for that, Ms. Kat. Dr. Trina?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me for this panel. My name is Valerie Forni. I'm an assistant professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, at UCLA. Good morning from me, and good afternoon to you. I run a basic biology lab. I work with fish to understand the basic how brains develop and how early circuits are established that basically will dictate the rest of an animals, including our lives, right? And we use fish as a model to be able to do that, especially the genetic, but also I focus a lot on genetics of brain development. And I think especially very acutely right now, there's a lot of conversation, especially for example, autism-linked genes. And so that's one of the aspects of what I work with. And I think especially now, kind of what part of the work that I do that's bioethics related, right, is the ethics of that kind of work and how it's communicated and how it's done in community with multiple different communities, and what that will mean for them. Beyond the work that I do, I also a research professor, but I also have a mentorship role. So I was recruited to UCLA through Hispanic Serving Institution Initiative. And I want to highlight the serving part of that. It's like serving institutions. So I serve students, and very similar to what Ms. Can just mentioned, right? Ensuring the students have the mentorship that they need and deserve for this. What excites me was a partnership with Prospera Institute. So I think really one thing that, especially in academia, happens a lot is we're very siloed and just kind of internal, and that's the opposite of what we want to happen, right? We want to work with people and for people, for communities, right? It depends on what are the questions that are affecting communities, and learning them, understanding them, being part of them. We're all part of different axes of community. And so really bringing that into the lab and having that be a formal part of how our lab operates, right? Working with community, understanding what are the needs, what are the questions, and how, as a lab, how do we address those experimentally, but more importantly, how do we work bi-directionally with community members to do the work, guide the work, and then be of service, our work be of service to community members however they need. And I'll touch upon that a little bit more in the actual panel part. So I'm really excited to be in partnership with Prospera for that kind of project, which is one of the arms of this lab.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Dr. Mohammed?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Christina Mohammed. I currently serve as the project director for the Public Health and Preventive Medicine residency program at Morehouse School of Medicine. Prior to that, I was a director for DEI education in our Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And my doctorate is in higher education administration with a focus on professional socialization practices and organizational culture. What does that mean? I love helping students learn their profession and learn what they're doing. And some of the work that I've been privileged to do is bring technology into these experiential learning spaces of learning while doing. What I love the most is being able to collaborate with our subject matter experts, and I'm excited to be able to show you some of the work that we've done, and I'm just thrilled to be with all of you today.
Happy Saturday, good people. Hey. So listen, I am Michael Maxwell. I am the Assistant Director of Educational Technology and Creative Design at Morehouse School of Medicine. All that to really say, I'm Dr. Conwell and Dr. Muhammad's tech guy. It's all that I do. And so what really excites me about this is I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I want you to answer with your chest. I want you to really resoundingly answer with your chest. Has this been informative? Has this been inspiring? Has this been impactful? well, then guess what? We get to add innovation to those eyes. And that's what excites me about this partnership, that we get to innovate something that's informative, innovative, impactful, and inspiring.
I love the energy. I love the energy from all of our panelists. And actually, I'm going to allow Dr. Muhammad and Dr. Maxwell to keep the mic. If you can tell us a bit more about the work that you're doing related to virtual reality and how it applies then to bioethics.
I'm going to ask Brother Lee to get that video ready.
Oh, yes. So our work with virtual reality. So we have been involved with one of our faculty members in particular, working with our human sexuality elective course. And you'll see in a moment, we have an example of how we engage, and I find that it's better to show rather than explain it to you because it's kind of an abstract concept. But essentially, we use this as a tool to introduce our students to the realities of the patients that they might engage with. And it's one of the ways we advance cultural humility. So I think you can start.
At Morehouse School of Medicine, we use virtual reality to help students develop communication and professionalism skills. Let's see how this all began.
To say that the global pandemic brought about unique sets of challenges to our world is an understatement. In education, students young and old were faced with dramatic disruptions to their academic lives. At Morehouse School of Medicine, our faculty were challenged with finding alternatives to clinical experiences that complied with strict pandemic guidelines for our fourth-year medical students. With this customization, Morehouse School of Medicine faculty and staff, led by Dr. Carrie Roth-Bayer, were able to develop robust scenarios for the human sexuality elective. Scenarios included an array of characters that included queer teens, same-gender loving couples living with disabilities, cisgender characters, senior citizens, and more. All scenarios were originally facilitated by our vendor. We had a plan. It was all going well, until it wasn't. American society was in the wake of the death of George Floyd and the floods of corporate acknowledgments that Black Lives Matter. Our virtual reality vendors' practices were called to immediate question. It appeared that the identity of their actors did not align with the identity of the avatars portrayed, illuminating the lack of diversity in their team delivering DEI content. Our vendor dropped our scenarios from their delivery library. As a result, we were left without experiential content for our medical students in this important course at such a critical time. At Morehouse School of Medicine, we see challenges as opportunities. We were given the opportunity to license the virtual reality software from our vendor and direct our own simulations. We jumped at the chance. Training to run virtual reality simulations as puppeteers was a steep learning curve. Personally, I came to the work completely green. Having a background in acting and gaming are qualities helpful to being successful in the virtual reality puppeteer role. I brought neither skill to the table. However, I am proud to report that we have found a path to delivering our content, helping our students practice medical history taking.
This has now evolved into training for various scenarios within medical education. Let's join a training demonstration.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Maxwell, and today I'm going to be serving as Mrs. Brooks' administrative assistant. Mrs. Brooks is our director of healthcare operations at our local campus health clinic. Ms. Brooks has a meeting with Dean Chase, two patients from our health clinic who has a complaint about their experience. Ms. Brooks, are you ready to meet Dean Chase?
Yes. Hi, how can I help you today?
Hi, Ms. Brooks. Thank you for taking time to meet with us. So we had a bit of a concern. We've been coming here a long time, and this is the first time being treated by Dr. Carey. I want you to know that we found Dr. Carey to be very dismissive of our concerns.
Yes, we came here seeking advice, and he really didn't listen to our concerns. He really seemed to be rushing, and after keeping us waiting for almost an hour, he was not attentive to our needs at all.
You know, she's right. Um, we've never experienced this before, and we know this clinic to be holistic and inclusive, and we just want some answers.
Well, thank you for sharing this information. I'm sorry that your experience did not meet your expectation. That doesn't really sound like Dr. Carey. Are you sure you heard correctly?
Are you, are you, what do you mean? We were the ones at the appointment.
Pause scene.
At this point in the scenario, the facilitator invites additional learners to step into the role of Miss Brooks. Immersion VR, participants can practice redirecting the conversation with empathy and professionalism, further engaging with Dee and Chase to reassure them that their concerns are being heard. Next, the learner will have the opportunity to interact with the physician to continue their development and training.
Hey, Dr. Carey, when you have a moment, I need to speak with you about some patient concerns.
I have 1 minute. Go.
Okay, so we have this couple, they have this disability, and they need to be seen about, and they need your help.
Which folks were these?
This was D and Chase, your 12 o'clock p.m. today?
Oh, damn.
Oh, them.
Uh, What's the problem? And who are you talking to like that? What did they want?
Pause.
Pause here. This section demonstrates how a conversation with a colleague can quickly escalate if not handled carefully. Learners will now have the opportunity to re-enter the simulation, try new approaches, and explore how Alexis could deliver feedback more effectively. This practice allows participants to build confidence in managing difficult conversations in a safe, controlled environment.
Thank you. So essentially, we like to create a laboratory for people to practice bad conversations and learn from skilled experts. So any feedback on that?
So it was something to hear about ADA, but it's something to really kind of experience it, right? And so our learners get to really experience what's it like on both ends of the spectrum, to be the one that's receiving the issue and to be the one to kind of address it with a colleague. And imagine this started in kind of just history taking, but is now through Dr. Conwell and Dr. Muhammad has now grown to really transforming and training everyone about how you deal with particular things.
Just a quick disclaimer, that was a reenactment of a scene. That was one of our graduate students, Alexis, who was playing the role of a student.
So thank you so much for that, Dr. Maxwell and Dr. Muhammad. Dr. Ternini, if you can, tell us a bit more about your research and particularly how you're involving community from a bioethics standpoint.
Sure. So my lab, as I mentioned, nutrition works with zebrafish. So how do we link that to people? So one of the arms that we have in the lab that's more geared toward bioethics, right, is guided by by a common principles of bioethics. And I don't know if you just kind of describe them here. Basically, they are right autonomy, beneficence, amorphosis, justice. So autonomy, especially, is basically having community members guide and have the empowerment and the ability to advocate for themselves and basically using science, whatever process or results from that toward that. And the last one I mentioned is justice, right? So especially now we are in very heavy times where we know, and this has been true, right? That a lot of the questions that science does or who science and medicine serves is not always the most just, right? There's a lot of different communities who yeah, who just are need different things and have been marginalized. And so that's part of the work that we're doing with in partnership with Prospera here in Los Angeles with an organization called Espresso Community Housing, where we're working with community members who are both affected and engaged in affecting change within their own communities and self-empowering their communities. My lab works on specifically, as I mentioned, genes or genetics of brain development, but also the different factors um, that are part of how brains develop. Part of that is our environments, and we know, especially in Los Angeles, and this is also true of Boston, where you're at. We know that increasing heat, extreme heat, as well as extreme noise, and particularly related to um, so certainly airplanes here, especially in Los Angeles, helicopter noise that particularly are much lower and constant and consistent in marginalized neighborhoods. And so really how do we understand how these environmental factors are affecting our everyday life, right? And particularly and disproportionately affecting marginalized communities. So I'll just pause there and just mention that that is one of the ways in which we're bringing the lab to the community, but also the community to the lab, right? Very bi-directional, having the community members guide the questions, being part of the community in whatever aspects that means. And, the goal is to work together toward change.
I really appreciate that, and I like how it was framed at the beginning of the day, this notion of from the lab to the block or from the bench to the block. Too often it takes years for these discoveries, sometimes even decades, to actually reach the community. And oftentimes there's an extractive component where the community feels as though they're just being used without actually getting the benefit. So I really appreciate the way your work is framed. Ms. Cannon, if you can share a bit more about how the Morehouse School of Medicine Office of Individualized Learning and Accessibility Services supports its differently abled students, and perhaps also speak to some of your learnings out of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, so for my office, we serve as a core partner in the student success ecosystem at the institution, where we, like I said, ensure that every student, regardless of their ability, has the ability to thrive in the institution, but also they're able to advocate for themselves, because what I find is that a lot of students don't always know how or when to properly advocate for themselves until sometimes it's too late. And when they're in settings such as medical school and more rigorous settings, that is not the time to wait until you're in a critical or in a deficit, because of course it impacts your academics and of course that impacts other things. So our office is really there to make sure that we are a safe environment for students to feel comfortable to get what they need. Of course, if they find that they do have a disability, so that is what our office is there to do, and the ways that in which that we provide students this feeling of safety, as well as this way to properly advocate for themselves. But one we have buy-in from the institution, where we provide a lot of training to our faculty and staff, because of course we want to make sure that they're aware of ADA and Section 504 and things of that nature, and they're on board with making sure that students are properly supported, but also knowing that this is the law, and so that we are, if a student does have a disability and they are requiring accommodations, then we do have to abide by the law reasonably, of course, but we want to make sure the faculty and staff are one or more. And then of course we also do a lot of training for our students as well, so they can know what their student rights and responsibilities are within that same realm. And then again, they are able to, based on understanding what their rights and responsibilities are, they're able to properly, again, I keep using the word advocate, but they're probably able to advocate for themselves, because that's important in this setting. And then also we take feedback from students, because I can't say that I always do things right. Sometimes I drop the ball. Sometimes there are things that I don't always know how to figure out, and so I welcome feedback from students so that I can make sure that I'm closing gaps. I also reach out to other institutions to kind of see how they're doing things, because one of the things I find in this space is that um, there's not always a rule book, like a rule book. And for me, I'm a type of, I like structure. I like everything to be like, I don't like the grays. I like black and white. But in this area, sometimes there are those grays. And so it's important for me to build networks where I can go outside of the institution sometimes to get what I need, or also know people within the institution that can help me with what I need. But then that comes from me listening to students. And so the last thing I do is we treat every student holistically. So we treat them holistically because every student's case is different. And so in doing that, we're able to provide individualized resources to remove barriers, whether it's in an academic, clinical setting, and even as far as outside of the institution when they get ready to take their awards and things of that nature. So those are some of the things that we do at our institution to support students. And I think the last question you asked me is, what did I learn from the pandemic? Well, of course, as I stated, I've only been in this space for about 2 years. So I came about maybe 2 or 3 years after the pandemic happens. But a few things that I've learned is that we found that there were a lot more students who were managing undiagnosed or emerging disabilities. And sometimes I found that a lot of students didn't really realize they had a disability until they got to a rigorous situation, or a rigorous academic setting. And also, too, what I found is that sometimes when students found out they had a disability, they may not have the resources to get the testing, or they didn't have the access to get the testing to be able to properly diagnose them. And so we've also provided resources in that regard as well, in which we've created an MOU with a psychological service that will provide a service where they will provide psychoeducational evaluations to our medical students at no cost to them. We front the bill for the students. So that was a way to eliminate a student having a disability from being concerned that they don't have the access to get the proper documentation so that the accommodations could be implemented on their behalf. So that was one way we were able to counteract the fact that a student may have had a disability but wasn't able to get the proper support. And then, of course, with that too, we found that with the shift to online learning, that kind of changed the scope of, that kind of increased challenges in how students were able to navigate an academic setting. So you're going from on campus to online, and now they're back on campus. So that kind of, that was a challenge as well. And then the last thing is that even with all of these challenges, one thing that I can say for myself as well as just the institution, we've been very good about pivoting and adjusting and making the necessary changes to make sure that we are able to properly support our students, no matter what that looks like. So even from the hidden disabilities, but as well as the physical disabilities too, because sometimes when you're thinking about medical school, the physical disabilities we don't always consider and really think about. But we do have students that may have physical disabilities, and we really have to rework that and relearn and figure out what that looks like. So those were some of the challenges, but again, through those challenges, we were able to pivot and figure out solutions based on the individualized or the student's case, because again, we look at them holistically.
Thank you for that, Ms. Cannon. I really want to underscore the importance of that holistic approach, and the reason that our minority serving institutions, one of the reasons why they're so important is for those students who had these hidden disabilities, and just for a little context, at least in the literature, less than 5% of medical students have disabilities. But what Morehouse learned during the pandemic, there was a tripling of failure rates on step one of the boards. And most of the students that were then subsequently referred on for disability testing came back with some undiagnosed disability. So either from a cognitive standpoint or from a psychiatric standpoint. And with extra support, holistic support, nearly all of those students were then subsequently able to pass the boards. And that type of energy effort is actually uncommon in many predominantly white institutions. So just want to underscore that, and Ms. Cannon, thank you for that great work that you're doing. So to all of our panelists, anyone can answer this question: how are you preparing the next generation of learners in the realm of bioethics and even beyond? So we've heard a bit about the way that we support them as they're going through their education, the research that is being done, and obviously the educational methods that are being used. So how are you envisioning sort of the future for these learners?
I would say mostly having them tune into their unconscious bias and being able to recognize physiologically when they are causing harm and when they're advocating for good. I also teach a community health course as well as leadership in health, health professions, and really just providing opportunities. I mentioned that laboratory space, creating those safe environments for them to confront challenging ideals and concepts so that we can correct them and learn from each other and help build from there. That has been, I think, the biggest impact, as well as giving them that confidence to do the right thing.
Just to add to that, Elise, Sarah, Joanne, and Julie, if you're still here, just raise your hand. All right, so if you listen to the first panel we did this morning, that was done this morning, I think that we get to blend science and technology and empathy to really train students to really be assertive and to be able to voice, much like those individuals did this morning. Right? That's our goal, is to get them to be as assertive and to voice ethical concerns and to understand all the things associated with this, just like those four wonderful people did this morning.
It's a beautiful thought. Ms. Cannon, Dr. Tarini?
Well, for me, what I would say is like, I don't know too much about bioethics, but what I do know is that I feel like the way bioethics and accessibility intersect is that it's, for me, when I'm engaging with these students, I want them to really understand that one of the things at Morehouse School of Medicine that we really value is justice, equity for all humans. We want to uphold human dignity. And so what I want students to understand, whether they have a disability or not, particularly the ones that have a disability, is whenever they go into the workforce, they may be engaging with people that have disabilities too. And I want them to make sure that just like I personally respect them and everyone at the institution holds them and respects them, we want them to also take that when they enter the workforce, particularly when they're engaging with patients, treat them with the same dignity and respect that they want for themselves. That's important to me. So I just want the students to just understand that you can't look at accessibility just from your lens. You need to look at the accessibility from the lens of the people that you're serving, just like I strive to do. So that's how I would think that those two bioethics and accessibility will kind of intersect from my lens.
And on my end, so I'm also part of my appointment comes through Institute for Society and Genetics. What that means is I'm charged with training both at the undergraduate level and doctoral students and postdoctoral researchers. Not just to do the science of the experiments, the technical, the thinking about the scientific questions, but in my case, in my chart, is to bring that a lot broader, right? So be able to integrate what we know from people, from community work with community to guide those kinds of questions that we do in a lot, and then bring it back to the community. And this can be just at the college level, undergraduate level. This can mean that students may be majoring in religion in disability studies, which we have a department. It depends on what it is. It's not just biology, and that's something that my lab specifically values, right? The intersectionality of the different fields and how that shapes the work that is especially now very, very much needed.
Thank you. I would love to open it up to the audience. What questions do you have for our panelists?
Hi, I just wanted to say first off, I want to thank you guys all for your work in creating kinder and more empathic doctors. I think that's very commendable. So my question is, so I want to go into psych nursing and eventually create policy change to make healthcare better for patients. Have you guys ever had, because doctor, nurse, kind of medical, have you ever had doctors that use wheelchairs or other mobility aids? And how do you like do that? Like, what do you do to make the world more accessible for those doctors?
Wonderful. Yeah. Absolutely, Ms. Cannon. Actually, I was going to direct this question to you and then perhaps to Dr. Mohammed. So the question relates to medical students with physical disabilities, and specifically, have we had medical students, and have you supported a medical student who had limited mobility, such as being in a wheelchair?
Okay, so I'm actually, it's funny you ask, because I actually dealt with my first case at the institution. And one of the things I'm a big proponent of is if a student is good enough to be admitted into an institution, they're good enough to graduate. And so we want to do everything in our power to make sure that they happen reasonably, of course. And of course, we want to make sure that it's not going to impact safety on the student or the patients. But one of the things in this case, I worked a lot with so many people in the institution. I work a lot with the academic side of the institution as well as the clinical side to really sit down to get an idea of what is required from a technical standard perspective from the student to be able to thrive in that educational space. And then also too, I worked a lot with the student's provider to see what the student can do within the realm of the technical standards, right? And what I did is, of course, once I was able to get all of that information, I was able to sit down again with all parties and all decision makers, so that them know based on what the provider stated that the student was able to do, and also make sure to work with the clinical side to see what can be reasonably accommodated for the student. And what we found is that in many cases, we are properly able to reasonably accommodate the students. Some things, of course, this is on the academic setting and the clinical side, and they're not actually out in the field. But some things what we found is that there's so much technology now, just like what Dr. Maxwell said, there's so much innovation now. And because of that innovation, we don't have to keep students or patients, we don't have to consider or not consider patients or students that have a physical disability, because there's so much technology to make sure that we're able to properly serve them. So from a student side, of course, there's simulations that can happen. There's video recordings that can happen. There's so much technology that can happen to make sure the student is getting the same experiences as their peers. But then when they're engaging with patients, the same thing. A student that has a disability, as long as they're able to articulate what it is that they've learned, they're able to match. There are wheelchairs, accessible wheelchairs that are geared towards students so that they can pretty much go into any type of specialty or any type of medicine that they would like, to make sure that they're able to properly service the students. I've been looking at videos where there's surgeons that are in wheelchairs. The hospital that they're working at, they were able to provide them with a wheelchair that allows them to lift up above the bed and also they're able to perform all kinds of surgeries. So there's a lot of technology that can be used to make sure that these individuals are able to properly serve. The biggest thing is just getting the support from the leadership and for an academic side, academic leadership, clinical leadership. And then once they get into the workforce, just make sure that wherever they match, those individuals are also willing to support them, of course, within reason. But it can be done. It's just making sure that everybody kind of gets a full picture of what's going on, and that we have to go with the provider to get that. But then also to make sure that we know what technical standards are on the academic side, but in the workforce, we know from an HR standpoint, what is it that must be a requirement of that specific specialty that must be completed, and make sure that it's not impacting the safety of the patient or the individuals involved. And once we kind of get all of that on the table and have deep discussions, then in many cases we can provide the support for the person with a disability to make sure that they're able to to transition into the workforce successfully and be provided with the support that they need, while also they're able to make sure that they're providing the necessary support to their patient, but it's within its safety. The safety is also involved in that as well.
Thank you for that, Ms. Cannon. Anything to add? Yeah, well covered. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm wondering if you have like any stories or ideas on how to like navigate the administration's attack on academia. Like every day we're watching a lab get defunded, departments get gutted. It's a demoralizing time to be a student. And a second part of that question is, how do you work with colleagues, and how do you stay in community with colleagues who are like ideologically opposed to the work that you're doing or the ideas that you're trying to push for?
Who wants to take that one?
Perfect. So I actually come from before I was in this role, I was in another role where it was federally funded to help low-income first-generation students to go to college. The TRIO programs, which are now under severe attack, right? And so what we have now decided is that to use technology to our advantage to help fight that fight. Somebody say the word thought partner. Say thought partner. So the idea is that AI and technology really needs to be your thought partner in the fight against anything that you have. And so what we're able to do now is take buzzwords and keywords and use those and turn those words into words that people want to hear, i.e., Secretary McMahon is now big on patriotic education. So how do we now take what we do in this space and turn it around towards patriotic education? We use technology to leverage that and to become our thought partner to help us to combat that. And so we're really big on the use of technology to really be our thought partner to really answer those questions.
Only to add on an individual level, I think in the first panel they mentioned that education is part of the fight, and showing up, for me, showing up is the resistance. I show up every day as part of my effort. It ties with my passion, but it's also where I get my boxing gloves. So I say keep showing up and finding ideological differences. I'm privileged at Morehouse School of Medicine, where we're kind of homogenous, so that's an HBCU, but people still have different walks. And, I make space for that, I really do. I have limits, but it's important that I'm able to think holistically about how I engage with my colleagues. And so just giving yourself grace in that space, but also understanding where you're educated, how you're intellectually able to navigate through this work. You can do it. It's a short story.
Dr. Tornini, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. So I was going to say and I don't know who just spoke, but I was going to say exactly that. So one of the ways is the work is the resistance, right? So still doing the work. UCLA was up until Wednesday, I think, we just got, after a collective-led lawsuit, we just got over $600 million back. That was illegally, I'll say it, withheld from our labs, right? From salaries, from people doing the work. So I'll say I agree with you. It is a very difficult time now to be a student, to be working in this. But the work doesn't stop, right? That's part of why we're here, and we keep pushing. And the second one is to whoever asked the question. You asked me about working with colleagues who are ideologically different from you, and that it depends on how different or in what context. What I would say to that is, you're going to get a lot of no's, a lot of rejection, but find the people, the structures, the communities who you want to work with, right? Who are say yes to what you think, what you want to do, especially as it relates to justice and this kind of work. And I don't know, don't pay attention to the no saying, just okay, go with the equal, good for people, right? That's also kind of why we're all here.
You have to find, even within academia, you have to find your tribe, find your community. Any final questions? And if not, I'm actually going to ask Joanne to just give a final framing around the Prospera Institute partnerships, and then I'll give a final thought for the panel.
Okay, awesome sauce. This could be my closing, right? Could it be my closing? No, it won't be my closing. Okay, so, wow, this is very beautiful. We are very excited because we get to work with Morehouse in this next phase. So Morehouse is our second partner in addition to Dr. Tornini and the UCLA lab. And I don't know if Dr. Tornini shared, but we just got our grant renewed because the community wanted the project to keep going. They saw an opportunity for us to grow this, so we're going to go into a phase 2 after December, I believe, which is really exciting for us as a small organization, but also for the community as well, because they feel empowered and they want to speak out on what's going on. With Morehouse, we get to do VR bioethics simulations. We're going to be working on that with students. We're going to select some organizations to work with us to create some bioethics simulations so that the students can increase their literacy in bioethics. Morehouse doesn't have a center for bioethics. The only center for bioethics in Massachusetts is where I studied at Harvard Medical School. MIT has kind of like an ethics center, but they don't have a fully fledged, and other institutions don't. One of the things that I'm committed to through Prospera is making sure that bioethics reaches the places where it's needed most, and that's HBCUs and historically Spanish-serving institutions. So we're really proud to be able to partner with MSM on this, and we know this is gonna open doors. I've already interacted with some colleagues at Spelman who are like, oh wow, that's super cool, let us know how it goes. We wanna be engaged as well. And this is all thanks to Dr. Conwell. He came last year, gave his keynote, and we were like, oh my God, we have to work together. We have to work together. So more on that to come, and we might tap some of you in this room to join us on this little fun project.
And one closing thought about the partnership with Morehouse. We're going to plan to actually have HEFA 2026 on the campus of Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah. So, again, more to come, but we'll continue to build and walk along this journey together. So with that, please join me in thanking our panelists for an incredible discussion.
Each year, the Prospera Institute presents the Biocentro Community Awards to 3 community organizations or individuals who are bioeticanto, doing the work in bioethics in everyday spaces. Doing the work in bioethics means asking hard moral questions, centering dignity, and putting action not only into hospital or policy rooms, but also into homes, classrooms, and organizing spaces.
The awards are named in honor of 3 pioneering thinkers and change makers whose contributions have shaped the framework for Latinx bioethics. It has also evolved into a community-engaged bioethics framework that guides Prospera's mission, vision, values, and programs. The first award, which is the Eugenio Maria de Hostas Award, is named after a Puerto Rican cultural keeper, educator, and abolitionist who championed the public education, women's rights, and anti-colonial self-determination across the Americas. The second award, named after Ada Maria Isasi Diaz, who was a Cuban-born Catholic theologian who developed mujerista theology, centering the struggle or la lucha of women, specifically Latinas, in everyday, day-to-day. Dr. Diaz encouraged us to look into the lives and lived testimonies of Latinas as a source of ethics, resistance, and justice. And the third award, named after Helen Rodriguez Trias, a Puerto Rican pediatrician and public health leader who advocated tirelessly for the rights and dignity of marginalized communities, specifically women and children impacted by social injustices. I'm just going to summarize what I said into Spanish for my colleagues here. Ahora estamos ofreciendo premios nombrado por 3 personas que son líderes en sus ámbitos de trabajo. La primera se llama Eugenio María de Hostas. Ella fue una puertorriqueña, una educadora que luchó para los derechos de las mujeres y también la independencia. La otra, Ada María Isasi Díaz, que fue una, no sé, theologian, ¿cómo se dice eso? Una persona que estudió, teóloga, gracias, que desarrolló una teología enfocada en las mujeres latinas y sus vidas. Y finalmente, Helen Rodríguez Trias, que fue una doctora, una médica que también luchó para los derechos de las comunidades marginadas y latinas. Ok, gracias.
Hi everyone, my name is Lily. So it is with great pleasure that we will give an award today. As we live the legacy of these thought leaders and the impact their works have had on our communities, how they have provided frameworks through which we can do the work of bioethics, and how their impact is embodied through the work of Prospera Institute. As part of what is becoming a standing tradition, each year, previous recipient, and that would have been me, in this case, the 3 of us pass on the award to 3 awardees who embody what it means to be bioethicando. Am I saying that? Okay, bioethicando in their private and public lives.
So the first award, it's my pleasure to offer in honor of cultural keeper, Eugenio María de Hostas, goes to one of our wonderful speakers earlier today, Elise Patterson, and the Abilities Dance Team. So to Elise Patterson. So as you heard, Abilities Dance is a professional dance organization founded in 2017 by Elise in response to the lack of opportunities for dancers with disabilities who are differently abled. The company creates inclusive dance performances and programs by bringing together dancers with and without disabilities to disrupt ableist stereotypes and to promote intersectional disability rights and cultural competency through art. So much to say about you. As a professional dancer with disabilities, Elise Patterson faced barriers to participating in existing dance spaces and was told that companies would not adapt their choreography for her needs. This became the fuel that inspired her to open Abilities Dance Boston, where disabled and non-disabled dancers can work together transforming these barriers into opportunities. Today, the organization's mission is to use dance as a tool for social change, amplifying disability narratives, promoting intersectional disability rights, and fostering cultural competency around disability. So congratulations. Yes. You want someone to take a photo?
Okay, the next one, who's given the next one?
So the second award is in honor of Helen Rodriguez Trias. It goes to Partners for Youth with Disabilities. Partners for Youth with Disabilities was founded in 1985 by Regina Snowden as a one-to-one mentoring program for youth with disabilities. At the time, mentoring was gaining prominence as a key intervention for bolstering life outcomes in at-risk youth. Yet, youth with disabilities were being systematically excluded from ongoing programs. In PYD's first year, Regina matched 9 youth with disabilities with adults with a similar disability, and the demand for a PYD service skyrocketed from there. So with, whoa. It's a little heavy, so with great honor, I present this award to you. Yes.
And last but not least, in honor of the Ada Maria Assisi Diaz, the In La Lucha Award goes to our lovely Kathleen, Miss Katie McGrain. Following in the footsteps of her parents, Brian and Pamela Ann McGrain, Brian is here, taking photos. Thank you for being here, sir. Katie has spent decades championing education equity for children in Massachusetts and beyond, including children with disabilities. Through her leadership with Swift Water's after-school program, the Massachusetts After School Partnership, and now the Innovation Learning Center, Katie has created pathways for countless young people to thrive. Innovation and Learning Center reflects her values, supporting agencies and partners to strengthen social, emotional, and educational development of children and youth through arts programming, computer science, and workforce development initiatives. These programs not only prepare students for the future, but they also affirm dignity and creativity in the present. We know the depth of Katie's impact because of our own, very own Joanne is a beneficiary of her efforts. Living proof that the seeds you have planted have sown. Today we are deeply honored to celebrate Katie not only as our fierce board chair at Prospera, but also as a sister, as a friend to the community who continues to lead with courage, compassion, vision, and love. Thank you.
Can I say something? Yes. I need to say that this honor, this award in honor of, I'm going to butcher her name, and I apologize, no, but Ana Maria, I strongly encourage you all to read her work. It is absolutely amazing. There are two things that I take away from her work and our work, all right, together is, one, social justice and faith in something greater than you go hand in hand. And also, to live is to struggle. Amen. And boy, have we had our struggles, right? And I am so proud of not only the woman that Joanne is today and all of your work with Prospera Institute, but I was proud of her the moment she, at 9 years old, knocked on my youth center and said, "What are you doing in here? Can I come? What's going on?" I still hadn't had the tiles up or the cabinets built. And she said, "What's going on?" And every day she would come down and try to get into my youth center. And I was like, "Here's the form. Take it to your mother. Take it to your mother." And eventually I just said, "Okay, if you read to the little kids," she's 9. I said, "If you read to the little kids, you can come every day." And I haven't been able to shake you. I'm proud of you, and I love you, and I thank you all for this honor, and I thank you all for supporting Prospera Institute, and I hope you continue to do so, not only in your words and your actions, but I would be remiss to not say with your donations as well, with a board chair. And congratulations to the other awardees.
Your speaking notes, guys, because we're missing ours. Go ahead, Katie. Casey.
So in addition to those awards, we also honor bioethicists and social ethicists whose track record speaks for itself about the impact that they have on their communities. Last year, I, alongside my colleagues who are also bioethicists, Emily Rodriguez and Katie, were the first recipients of this award.
That's right, Casey. These puzzle pieces represent part of our collective work to create more inclusive moral societies through research, education, and social action that includes advocacy and movement building. The recipients of these puzzle pieces, like our bioethics awardees, are doing the work of bioethics in the public square. The only difference is that we all have had special training in ethics, which informs our practice.
So now it is my honor to pass on these awards to Reverend Dr. Gloria White Hammond and Reverend Dr. Ray Hammond, the co-pastors of Bethel AME, which has been a community partner and host of the Health Equity for All Symposium for the past 3 years. The Hammonds have a standing legacy not only in Boston, but globally for their work in ministry and their work in community as social justice activists and organizers.
And the last two individuals who I am fortunate not to only call colleagues, but also friends and family to PI. Dr. Valerie Tornini leads the Tornini Lab at UCLA. She and I met a little over 3 years ago and have maintained our relationship since then. Valerie was actually a part of our inaugural symposium in 2023, and this year we have been fortunate to partner with her and her lab on a study exploring how heat and noise pollution impact brain development, which you will hear a little bit more about later. Can you pull up Valerie in the Zoom? She joined the Zoom for the award ceremony. Valerie's receiving this award because as a Latina ethicist, she embodies her moral commitments in all aspects of her work and leadership, striving to make the world a better place through teaching, research, and scholarship. Her mentorship and friendship and collegiality have personally blessed me, and I'm honored to give her this award this year. Valerie will show you the award because you're not here with us, but if you want to say something, please do. If not, we'll save it for the panel. Is this the computer?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah. We can hear you, yes.
Okay, yeah, it was just a very deep thank you very much for this. But we'll see you this afternoon.
And the next award, we can also say the same about Dr. Walter Conwell, who was last year's keynote speaker and quickly became a part of Prospera's family. Walter's a visionary leader with a humble heart, and he's always ready to support others while leading with excellence and integrity. He has used his lived experiences to empower students entering medicine and health professions at Morehouse School of Medicine and beyond, reminding us that mentorship and service are as powerful as scholarship. What makes Walter extraordinary is not his leadership, but the way that he carries it, with humility, generosity, and a steadfast commitment to social justice. He embodies the spirit of bioethics in action as we know it, centering the people and opening doors for those who have come after him. We are so fortunate to count him as part of our community and to honor him with this little award today. Okay, I want this picture and I want a picture with everybody, so get ready to. Since you weren't in the room.
So once again, it is my honor, our honor, to pass on these awards to Reverend Dr. Gloria White Hammond and Reverend Dr. Ray Hammond.